Dear friends, dear participants, I'm glad to welcome you here at the plenary session of the 14th Valdai Discussion Club conference. As usual, before this plenary session, we had 3 very interesting days in discussions to the most relevant topics. The theme today might be pretentious. We've borrowed it from the famous economist and sociologist of the 20th century, Joseph Schumpeter, by remembering his term, coined by him, creative destruction. Will a new world order emerge from the current conflicts? And these days we've been trying to understand what part should we focus on, creation or destruction, and we've had various points of view of the matter. I would like to ask the head of the Valdai Council, Andrei Bystritsky, to briefly tell us about what we discussed. Please welcome. Thank you very much, Fyodor. Mr. President, Mr. Karzai, Mr. Ma, Mr. Toye, dear colleagues, this is indeed an honor to be with you today at the concluding panel session of the 14th annual Valdai Conference. The conference, to my mind, and only to my mind, was quite successful. In any case, everyone I've talked about our conference in the superlative degree. In certain way, annual grand Valdai conference with their growing quality remind me of the note sheets by Ferenc Liszt, who made the remarks for the musicians. On the first page he wrote, "Play fast," on the second, "Play even faster," on the third, "Play as fast as you can," and on the fourth, "Even faster." So for the next Valdai conference, we would need to come up with something special. The name of the conference, Creative Destruction, Will a New Order Emerge from the Current Conflicts? This is a development of the previous Valdai conferences, during which we have discussed the world order, whether the rules exist, and many other matters. The idea that creation can be born out of destruction is not new. Even in the ancient times, they talked about conflict being the basis for everything, and creation through disputes can be possible when you productively approach conflicts and be rational. Unfortunately, as we've remarked in our preliminary report, rationality comes in short supply. And one of our achievements is the new term we coined, strategic frivolity, which speaks of the preparedness to create risk situation to serve one's vested tactical and even whimsical interests. The conference was full to the brim to the memorable statements, which reflected the general sentiment that we are facing the end of times. And one of the participants said that we need to avoid war in the coming 15 years, and the other estimated the possibility of war on the Korean Peninsula at 20%. Over the course of our conference, we wanted to have a broad scope of conflicts defining the destiny of humanity. We talked about the conflict between geopolitical visions of the world, and people see world differently, and it means that there's no unified vision of the future of humanity. At the same time, we need those visions because the world is united and its parts more interconnected than previously. And the problem is that the current world does not produce security, but wastes up and uses up the security accumulated by the forward-looking politicians of the past. And according to some members, we need to review the previously rock-solid notions such as the division to center and periphery and continental and sea powers. We've discussed the conflicts related to humanism and technologies. Relatively recently, technologies have helped and developed humane qualities and helped to satisfy our needs. For example, in fast ride, but the new technologies are now changing the structure and enforcing new, previously non-existent models of behavior. And at the end, we will see the AI emerge, and robots would substitute people in many of the professions. But what the reaction would be like? That's a grand question. And the AI might be personified by attractive blonde, for example, as certain participants remarked. It is clear that new information technologies have led to the fact that information space have become so valuable as, for example, the land during the Columbus times, and intrusion into others' information space is now a serious challenge to security. We've also discussed the conflict between humans and nature, and even having the AI, people have to live somewhere, and the wildlife is rapidly shrinking. Even now, the number of tigers living in zoos is much lower than those living in jungles or in taiga, and we need to review our attitude to nature because it should be subordinate to economic concerns. The humanity is now responsible for the world, and how should we resolve those world processes? Yesterday we presented the Future Preparedness Index, which was developed with the Russian Public Research Opinion Center. This index, which spanned through the G20, is deemed to show the readiness to various challenges of the future, which are hardly predictable. We've also given up the new Valdai Award, the first for the contribution into the understanding of modern world processes and clarifying the situation, and the jury decided that the Russian academician and studies specialist Vitaly Naumkin received it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrei. As you see, our agenda was quite diverse and spanned across cross-cutting themes. When experts gather together, they can show a certain degree of alarmism and pessimism and to have a certain fear regarding the future. But this is their advantage before the politicians, because the politicians and officials cannot do that. They have to be optimistic. So now I give the floor to the President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Vladimir Putin, to provide us with some optimism. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm going to provide you with some optimism, but I know that you've had very active discussions these 3 days, and I will try, as is the tradition, to express my point of view on them. And if I would repeat myself, please don't be angry with me, because I didn't follow all the discussions. But at the outset, I would like to welcome Mr. Ma, Mr. Toya, Mr. Karzai, all our colleagues and friends. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. I'm glad to welcome you all to this Valdai Club meeting. As tradition goes, it is dedicated to the most relevant issues of global politics, economy, and this time the organizers, as you've just mentioned, have come up with a very important challenge to look beyond the horizon, to think about what the coming decade holds for Russia and for the whole international community. Of course, you cannot predict and take into account all the opportunities and risks we are about to face, but we need to understand and to feel the key trends, to find innovative solutions to the questions that we see and that are going to arise. And the pace is such that we need to react to them constantly and rapidly. The world has entered the period of fast changes, and the reality and the thing of ordinary are now things that we spoke of as something out of fantasy, something that is not going to take place. And equality new processes are taking part in all the areas, and the stress dynamics in the public life of various countries, the technological revolutions are now intertwined with the changes on the international arena. The competition and rivalry is more acute for the place in global hierarchy. At the same time, the previous recipes for global ruling, overcoming conflicts and natural contradictions are of no use. They do not work, while new ones have not yet been developed. Undoubtedly, our interests do not coincide in all of the areas, and this is natural. This has always been the case, and the leading powers have different geopolitical strategies and vision of the world. This is the unchangeable core of international relationships, based on the balance of cooperation and rivalry. But when this balance is disrupted, and when we question the fact of existence of the global rules, when everyone wants to defend their interests at any price, then any disputes are unpredictable and risky, and they lead to very severe conflicts. At the same time, no real global challenge in such conditions, and with the question being phrased like that, cannot be resolved. The relationships between the countries are only deteriorating, and security is now in short supply. And instead of progress and democracy, freedom is given to radical element, extremist groups, which are denying the very notion of civilization and want to plunge it into chaos. into barbarism. The history of recent years has been a poignant example. We can just see the situation in the Middle East, which was reshaped according to the interest of some players as they saw it. They wanted to enforce their model of development through the coup d'etats and through their direct use of arms. Instead of jointly trying to resolve the situation and to hit terrorists and not to imitate hitting them, our colleagues are instead trying to give a permanent status to this chaos. And some people believe that this is a controllable situation, while the experience of recent years shows some positive examples as well. And I'm talking about, and probably you do not expect me to say that, the Syrian example. It shows that such self-assured and destructive policy can be challenged with some alternatives, and Russia is countering terrorists together with the legitimate government of Syria and other countries in the region. We are working based on the international law, and I would like to say that those actions and these positive developments come at a price. There are lots of contradictions in the region, but we've been patient, and by measuring every step and every word, we've been working with all the participants of this process while paying respect to their interests. And our efforts as they were challenged by our colleagues, do give some food for hope. They were professional, right, and in line with the times. Or another example, all this hype around the Korean Peninsula, I guess you've heard a lot about that and spoke a lot about that. We definitely condemn the nuclear tests carried out by the DPRK. At the same time, we are implementing all the decisions regarding the DPRK taken by the Security Council, and I would like to highlight that so there wouldn't be any dubious understanding that we are implementing all the decisions of the Security Council. But this problem should be resolved through dialogue, and DPRK should not be backed into a corner, should not be threatened with the use of power, and we should not resolve to being rude and having this conflict. Whether you like the DPRK regime or not, whether it's good or not, you should not forget that the DPRK is a sovereign state, and any contradictions should be resolved peacefully and through the dialogue of civilizations, and this is what Russia has always supported. We are strongly convinced that even the most difficult nodes, the crisis in Syria or Libya, on the Korean Peninsula, or in Ukraine, should not be cut, but rather detangled. And stability might be fragile even in a well-off state, and we can see that in the example of Spain. Who could have expected that the discussion on the status of Catalonia, which has such a long history, would result in such an acute political crisis? Russia's position is unchanged. It is an internal affair of Spain and should be resolved within the framework of the Spanish law, in line with the democratic traditions. We're aware that the country's leaders are taking steps in that direction. The Catalonia situation showed the unanimous condemnation of all those freedom fighters by the EU and a number of other countries. In this regard, I would like to underscore, you should have thought about that before. Has no one heard about those centuries-long contradictions in Europe? You were aware of that. Sure you did. But you even welcomed the collapse of a number of states in Europe, and you were not hiding that you were happy about it. But why you were so heedless in using this political situation and the desire to appease the big brother from Washington to support the separation of Kosovo so unanimously by provoking other such processes in other regions. I remind you when Crimea declared its independence, and then as a result of a referendum of joining Russia, those results were not taken into account. They didn't like them. And now you have the same thing with Catalonia and Kurdistan in another part of the world. And this is not an exhaustive list. And the question arises, what are we going to do? How are we going to treat that? And according to some of our colleagues, there are the true freedom fighters and there are separatists who cannot defend their own rights even through democratic mechanisms. Such double standards, as we call them, this is the most poignant example of double standards. And they pose great risk for the stable development of Europe and other continents and for the integrational processes all over the world. In their own time, the champions of globalization said that the guarantees protecting us from global rivalry would be global interdependence, but this was not the case. Moreover, the nature of disputes is now more complicated and complex. They are multi-layered and non-linear. Yes, this link is the thing that keeps them together, but at the same time we see more and more examples as politics gets rudely involved in economic and market relationships. They told us that it was not possible, that it was counterproductive, and we shouldn't let this happen, but now those who said so are doing that themselves, and some people are not even trying to hide that they are using political pretexts to forward their own purely commercial interests. The recent sanction package adopted by the American Congress is aimed at squeezing Russia out of the European markets of energy, and they want Europe to use liquefied gas, more expensive, from the US. They are trying to put barriers in our path for the South and North Streams, the new routes, even though such diversification and the diversification of such logistics is economically beneficial for Europe and serves to provide greater stability and security. And each state has its own economic, political, and other interests. And the question is how and through what means you should defend them and promote them. In the modern world, you can't win strategically by sacrificing others. Such policies based on egotism, self-assuredness, and the view of oneself as being exclusive would not give you true grandness or respect. And the natural, just moving away from this would be caused. And as a result, we would see further rise in tensions and contradictions instead of trying to form a stable and sound world order and to respond to the technological, environmental, and humanitarian challenges that the humanity faces today. Dear colleagues, the scientific progress, robotization, digitalization now lead to deep economic, social, cultural changes and changes in values. New prospects open up unprecedented before. But at the same time, we need to find answers to a number of questions. What would be the place of a human in the triangle technology, human and nature? How the states are going to behave, which due to the climatic changes and technological changes would be deprived of the conditions for normal life? And taking into account the robotization, how can you provide employment? How are you going to interpret Hippocratic oath when the doctors would be omnipowerful wizards, so to say? And would the AI dominate the true intellect, and whether the AI would become a separate matter independent from us. Previously, while assessing the role and influence of states, we talked about the geopolitical factors, the land they had, the military power, the natural resources. Undoubtedly, those are important factors even today, but nowadays, another important factor, no doubt, is scientific and technical factor, and it's going to become even more important. This was always the case. But today, that would have a breakthrough nature and would really rapidly become a decisive element in politics and security. And this scientific and technical dimension is now a universal political factor. It's evident that not even the most modern technologies cannot provide for sustainable development. And harmonious future is not possible without social responsibility, without freedom and equality, without respect to the traditional values and human dignity. Otherwise, the brave new world, instead of harmony and prosperity, would turn into totalitarianism, conflicts, and a surge in conflicts. Even today, this gaping inequality gives people the sense of being deprived and sense of justice. So they want to change this current situation, even through using violence. And this has already happened in the history of several countries, even in our own history, in the history of Russia. Then, following the successful technological and industrial step, we've faced some disruptions and collapses. Because we have not managed to resolve all the accumulated social tensions, we have not overcome those evident social anachronisms. Revolution is always a consequence for the lack of responsibility. Those who wanted to freeze and to conservate those obsolete and outdated mechanisms, situations, and resulting from the actions of those who want to spur change, not being stopped by civil conflicts and contradictions.
Today, going back to the lessons of 100 years ago, to the Russian Revolution of 1917, we can see that those results were intertwined with the negative, and we have to admit positive consequences of those events, and we have to ask ourselves, were we able to develop not through revolution, but through evolution, not with the destruction of the statehood and the destruction of many human destinies, but through the moving forward. Along with this, the social fabric, social model of the that were utopic on the first stage after the revolution of 1917 that tried to form new state gave a huge impetus for the transformation all over the world. This fact is evident and we have to admit it. New models of development were evaluated and it gave birth to the new models of competitiveness and I would say that the so-called West have gained lessons from this. What do I mean? Those are not only just geopolitical victories after the so-called Cold War. It was the response to other things, was the reaction towards the challenge from the USSR. Those are the achievements of the West in the 20th century. I mean, the raising the level of life and forming of new middle class, reforms in the social sphere and the labor market, guarantee of human rights, including the minorities and women's rights, overcoming of racial segregation that I would like to recall several decades ago was a undecent practice in many countries, in the United States as well. After the radical changes that took place in our country and in many other countries, at the end of 80s and the beginning of the 90s, we had a great opportunity to open a brave new chapter of history. I, of course, refer to the period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, our Western partners, after having shared the geopolitical inheritance of the USSR, thought that they were right. They declared themselves victors in the Cold War, as I mentioned, and they began to intrude into the internal affairs. They began to export democracy, just as the Soviet leadership tried to export socialist revolution all across the world. We've seen the expansion of NATO and the remodeling of the spheres of influence, and self-assurance always gives birth to errors, and the result is very well known. We've lost 2.5 decades, we lost many possibilities and a heavy burden of lack of confidence. Global disbalance has become even more evident. We see the declaration about the necessity to solve world problems, but in reality we see the egoism which is growing. International institutions are undergoing erosion that were aimed to formulate our common agenda. The basic multilateral international agreements are being devaluated, as well as bilateral important agreements. I've been just told that several hours ago the President of the United States, Donald Trump, in social networks has mentioned the cooperation between Russia and the United States in one of the most important areas, in the area of nuclear cooperation and interaction. Yes, this area is one of the most important in our relationship, taking into account the fact that both Russia and the United States have a great responsibility towards the world, being the two major nuclear states. But I would like to avail myself of this opportunity and to speak in greater details of what has happened during those decades, those years in this important area. In order to give you a full image, I will take 2 more minutes of your time. In 1990s, several agreements were signed. They were landmark agreements. First, 17th of June 1992, the Nan-Lugar program, and the second one on 18th of February of 1993, megatons to megawatts program, when highly enriched uranium was turned to low-enriched uranium, so HEU, low EU, from the signs of those phrases. It treated about the physical protection of nuclear materials, decommissioning and utilization of radioisotopic thermoelectrical generators and the submarines. And the Americans, I would like to draw your attention to the fact this is not secret information, but no one knows about this. They made 620 verification visits to the Holy of Holies of Russian nuclear complex, to the fabrics that were aimed to elaborate new plutonium and weapon-grade plutonium and uranium and new types of weapons. The United States got access to all the secret facilities of the Russian Federation, and along with this agreement was unilateral. In essence, in the framework of the second agreement, Americans made another 170 visits to our enriching facilities, to the most closed zones of those facilities, to the mixing units, and to other facilities, to the most powerful enriching facility in the Ural factory. We even had constant American watching posts, and in different rooms of this fabric, we had permanent working places where American specialists, they were going to the places because they worked there. It was their permanent workplace. And in those rooms, as it's usual in the Russian secret facilities, we had American flags. Moreover, we had a list of 100 American specialists from 10 different organizations from the United States that had the right to have additional inspections anytime without any prior notification. So all of this continued around 10 years. Under this agreement, Russia has decommissioned more than 500 tons of weapon-grade uranium. This is the same as 20,000 tons of nuclear weapons. This program, Megatons to Megawatts program, was one of the most effective measures of a real disarmament in the history of all humanity. I can assure you, and I'm fully confident, each step of the Russian Federation was controlled by the American specialists. Meanwhile, the United States has limited themselves to the limitation of their arsenal, which was not so big. It was their goodwill, as they said. Our specialists visited the facilities of nuclear complex of the United States, but only upon invitation and under the conditions that were determined by the American side. From our side, as you see, we demonstrated unprecedented openness and confidence. By the way, we'll talk about this. What did we get from this? It's very well known. They fully ignored our national interests. They supported separatism in North Caucasus, actions ignoring the Security Council of the UN by means of force, for example, Yugoslavia and Belgrade bombings, their forces in Iraq, and so on and so forth. Well, yes, they just went to see what our economy looked like, and then they didn't even have to refer to international law. Then, at the beginning of the 21st century, we had a new stage of our cooperation when we signed a number of strategic agreements in the area of peaceful use of nuclear energy, which is known in the USA as the 1-2-3 agreement. But in 2014, the USA has unilaterally suspended the work under this agreement. We are puzzled and we are concerned with the situation around the decommissioning of the weapon-grade uranium, which was signed in the year 2000. According to the protocol to that agreement, we had the actions in order to make the weapon-grade plutonium to the state that will not allow it to be used in the weapons, with the weapons objectives, in order to make MOX fuel, and then it's burning in reactors. Some changes to that methods were allowed only through the coordination between the parties. This is what was stated in protocols and in agreements. What Russia has done, we elaborated this fuel, we constructed the facility for the production, and as stipulated in the agreement, we constructed the BN-18 reactor in order to burn this fuel. We complied with all of the responsibilities assumed by us according to this agreement. What the Americans did, they began to construct the Savannah River facility, the price of which was $4.86 billion, but they spent around $8 billion, and the readiness of this facility has been taken to 70%, and then they suspended the construction works. Well, as we know, in their budget proposition for 2018, they asked $270 million in order to conserve and to decommission this facility. Well, the question is, where's the money? Were they stolen? Or they miscalculated it when they planned their construction process? Well, it may happen. It happens in our country as well. But this is not what interests us. This is not our business. We would like to know what happens with uranium, with plutonium. And what about the decommissioning of the plutonium? Because they want to do it with the methods of geological waste disposal and dilution. But this goes against the spirit and letter of the agreement, and it doesn't guarantee the impossibility to go back to the military material. This is truly puzzles us. Russia, more than 17 years ago, ratified the CTBT treaty, and the United States hasn't done it to the moment. The critical mass of problems in the area of international security is getting bigger. In 2002, the United States of America has quit the agreement on anti-air defense and been the initiators of the CWC agreement and international security. They initiated this agreement. They not comply with their responsibilities and obligations. As of now, the USA is the major holder of these weapons of mass destruction. Moreover, the United States has moved it in terms of the liquidation of their chemical weapons from 2007 to 2023. Well, for the state that is a champion of non-proliferation and the control over arms, it is not a good thing to do. But the Russian Federation has finished this process on 27th of September this year. So this was a great contribution of our country to the strengthening of international security. And the mass media from the West just didn't mention this fact. Only in Canada some newspaper mentioned this, but nothing more. And the Soviet and Russian arsenal of chemical weapons may be careful to destroy all the lives on our planet. Of course, we have to deny the obsolete agenda. I'm speaking about what has happened, but with no doubt we have to look forward. We have to stop looking back. It's clear, and I told this in order to understand what today's situation looks like. And now of course, we have to open our frank and candid dialogue, not only between the most progressive members of the international community, but with the participation of all of the members of international communities, with the representatives of different continents, different cultures, political, economical systems. In a changing world, we cannot let ourselves not to be flexible, open, and able to fast and precise reaction. The responsibility towards the future, this was what unites us in today's era when everything changes, and at a time the humanity has never possessed this might and power over nature, over space, communications, over our own existence, but this power is dispersed. Its elements are concentrated in the hands of public and religious groups and even some citizens. Of course, it would not be easy to unite all these elements to a unique structure. It would not be easy. It will require a hard work, and I have to admit that Russia is ready to participate in this work with all the interested stakeholders. Dear colleagues, what's the future world order that we see? For example, in 2045, when the UN will mark its 100th anniversary, the creation of the United Nations has been a symbol of the fact that the humanity, despite everything, is able to elaborate common rules of conduct and to follow and abide by these rules. And when they left these rules, we faced the crisis. Along with this, over the last 10 years, there were several attempts to diminish the role and the image of this organization or to control this organization. All of those intents, of course, failed. And as we see, the UN, with its universal legitimacy, should be a center of international system, and our common task is to raise its effectiveness and raise its profile, because we don't have any alternative. As for the veto right in the Security Council, which somebody tries to undermine, I would like to recall that this mechanism was established in order to avoid direct conflict between might powers. It was the guarantee against adventures, and so that not any country could not have the possibility to justify their aggressive actions. Of course, it is evident, we are all experts here, that some actions were such that United Nations looking backwards, tried to legitimize some actions of international actors. Well, but it didn't lead to any good thing. Of course, we need reforms. We have to improve the UN system, but reforms should be evolutionary. They should be done step by step, and they should be supported by the overwhelming majority of international actors. They should be supported through wide consensus, as we say in our foreign ministry. The UN is a representative organization with the overwhelming majority of sovereign states in the world, and the basic principles of the UN should be preserved in the future, because we don't have any other structure that would be able to reflect the international politics. Today we have new centers of influence and new models of growth. We have civilizational alliances, political and economical groups. Of course, this diversity cannot be unified. That's why we have to harmonize our cooperation, regional organization in Eurasia, America, Africa, in Asia-Pacific region. They should all act under the aegis of the UN, and they should coordinate their efforts. Along with this, each group should function through their own visions and principles that correspond to their cultural, historic, and geographical peculiarities. We have to mix global interconnectedness and the openness with the preservation of self-identity, of which region and of each people. Of course, we have to pay tribute and pay respect to the sovereignty as a basis of all of our relations. Dear colleagues, of course, technological progress may be overwhelming, but the history is done by a human with all our deeds, with all our efforts, with all our mistakes. Our future may only be common. There are no separate futures. Just do not exist. They will not exist in today's world, and the responsibility for the absence of conflicts in today's world is upon the whole international community. As you know, nowadays, in those days in Sochi, we have World Festival of Youth and Students. Many young people are talking to each other, discussing problems that concern them. They don't have any barriers like political disagreements or cultural disagreements or differences. All of them are dreaming about the future, and they believe that the life of future generations will be more just and more secure. And our task, our responsibility today is to spare no effort so that those expectations will come true. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Putin. If you would allow me, I have one clarifying question. You mentioned the scientific and technical factor as the most important today, but even as we remember it, the living generation, I mean, there were certain surges of the euphoria regarding the importance of technologies, and then they kind of went nowhere, and they spoke about the basic ground, the demography, and all the other factors, and those are eternal factors where technologies get adapted, but the basic thing remains the same. Why do you think it's a breakthrough right now? The things you mentioned, those are internal values. In the Torah, it is written that refusing your lands is a great sin. But the lands and the riches contained thereof are important factors. But there's a qualitative change. The pace of changes is so fast, and German Gref probably told you about it. All the anecdotes, and he can do it through the night, by the way. It becomes clear that this scientific and technological factor is now a decisive factor in military security and international politics. The changes are very fast, and those changes are irreversible. Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Hamid Karzai, who for 10 years has been at the helm of the country, which is a part of all those processes which we witnessed, but at the same time, unfortunately, is facing the problems not of the 21st century, but rather the previous centuries, and is trying to resolve them. You have unique experience in that department. Now over to you, Mr. Karzai.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Your Excellency, Vladimir Putin, the Honorable President of Russia, honored colleagues on the podium, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tremendous honor for me to be among you all today here. I participated in the deliberations and discussions in the past 2 days. I've been to many such occasions in the past 15 years. This is among the best. And I hope Mr. Bertitsky can invite me again next year. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Valdai Discussion Club has raised an issue creative discussion where a better world emerged from the current conflicts? Well, I'm from a very small country with very limited means. But somehow or the other, our location in the past 3 centuries has thrown us in the middle of the greatest of games. And we have been the center of those games for good or for worse. And from my point of view and from the point of view of the Afghan discussion of creative destruction, I would rather use, in our case, the phrase used by the Tsarist foreign minister of Russia at that time, Count Nisseldorf. I think Vasily Nisseldorf, if I'm not wrong. He called the great game of the time Tournament of Shadows, where you saw a game at play, you saw shadows, but you didn't see the actual hands behind unless you looked closer and deeper. Afghanistan has gone through the tournament of shadows in the past 2 centuries, at least. 19th century, that Nisseldorf called the tournament of shadows between Great Britain and the Russian Empire. Afghanistan was in the middle. We played both sides. But the British happened to be a bit more clever than the Afghans, and we lost part of our territory. And then in the 20th century, with the rise of the Soviet Union as our neighbor and as a great power, from 1919 to 1979, Afghanistan saw the greatest period of its stability on account of having us balanced the Soviet Union and the United States properly. Of course, we were more reliant on the Soviet Union, much closer to the Soviet Union, but also did shake hands in a warm way with the United States and allowed them to come and participate in the building of our country. With the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Afghanistan became the hot spot of the Cold War, or the war turned hot on Afghanistan at that time. It is this specific period of the Afghan resistance against the former Soviet Union that has left us with tremendous legacies, terrible legacies. While on the one hand, the Soviet Union was trying to impose communism on Afghanistan, as His Excellency the President referred to the larger world, those who were helping the Afghan resistance, the Americans and their allies and our neighbors, some of them, especially Pakistan, our neighbor, they tried to use the Afghan resistance, which we were doing for our liberation, to defeat the Soviet Union through the use of radicalism, religious radicalism. So the arrival of those extremist elements into Afghanistan, the import of those elements into Afghanistan, and the massive destruction that they tried to cause to Afghan society in tradition and culture. We were a Muslim country, a deeply believing Muslim country, but we were a moderate country, never an extremist country. We still are a moderate country, but the US and its allies tried to turn us into an extremist country in order to use religion to defeat the Soviet Union. So they would call our resistance to the Soviet Union as the Americans would fight to the last Afghan, the Soviets. The end of that conflict, there were only 2 losers who were before that close friends, the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. We both suffered badly. Afghanistan more so, much more so, much more so. And we see the consequences even today. The United States, for a while, became the sole superpower, or as they wish, the hyperpower. Europe did better. Pakistan did much, much better. It became a nuclear power and got all the intelligence tools that they needed. Afghanistan suffered and continues to suffer to today. The tragedy of September 11 suddenly brought us once again into the very center of the world. The US, after that tragedy, with the backing of the United Nations, with the backing of Russia, with the backing of China, with the backing of our neighbors, Iran and India, and also in a way Pakistan and the rest of the international community intervened in Afghanistan. That intervention in the initial stages succeeded dramatically and most efficiently. Not because of the military might of the United States, I must note this point. Not because of the, what are those planes called? F-52s, M-52s? B-52s. Not because of those planes, not because of the military might of the United States, but because the Afghan people cooperated. It was the first time in our history that the Afghan people cooperated with an invading force, with an arriving foreign force. It was for that that success came within a month and a half. I don't want to go into lengths of that. I will just give you a small story in which I was personally involved. When the US just arrived, I was in central Afghanistan in a place called Tirinkot in Uruzgan province. It was the month of Ramadan. I was having iftar or dinner with some colleagues, and suddenly someone came to say that the Americans who arrived last night in Tirinkot, a group of 14 of them, CIA and the military together, that they want to see you. And as they came in, the man sitting with me was narrating a story, telling me on how, in chasing the Taliban, the US planes had accidentally bombed his house, in which he lost 3-4 of his grandchildren and daughter. So I was embarrassed. I did not know if I should invite the Americans while this man has suffered so much. I asked him, I said, gentlemen, should I invite the Americans? He said, yes, please, by all means, bring them in. So I invited the Americans. They came in, a colonel and a CIA officer who later became the deputy chief of CIA, recently retired. When they sat, I told them that this is what has happened to this man, and he's lost his family in your bombings. And then this man stopped me and said, no, tell them that I have 3-4 more children. If in the liberation of Afghanistan, I lose the other 3 children and grandchildren of mine, I won't mind. I want my country liberated. It was the kind of enthusiasm that they had. And for a number of years, we did very, very well. Education, health services, democratic institutions, women's, their rights, their arrival on the scene of Afghanistan, because of the support of the Afghan people and because of the support of all the countries present here, primarily the big powers, Russia, China, Iran, and others neighbors. I was taken to the United States on a US plane. I was brought to Moscow, Mr. President, on a Russian plane. Your government may have not told you. I came on a Russian plane. I went to China on a Chinese plane. The Iranians provided the same facility. It was this massive international cooperation with the US and its allies that made us success. But soon, we began to get troubles. Extremism arrived again, violence erupted again, terrorism arrived again, and the US did not pay attention to where it was coming from. It began bombing Afghan villages, it began killing Afghan people, it began putting Afghan people in prisons. And the more they did, the more we had extremism. Today, I'm one of the greatest critics of the US policy in Afghanistan. Not because I'm anti-Western, I'm a very Western person. My education is Western, my idea is Western. I'm very democratic in my inner instincts. And I love their culture. But I'm against the US policy because it is not succeeding. It is causing us immense trouble and the rise of extremism and radicalism and terrorism. I'm against the US policy because under their watch, under the total control of Afghan airspace, of Afghan intelligence, of Afghan military, of all that they have, that superpower, there is Daesh in Afghanistan. Who is How come Daesh emerged in Afghanistan 14 years, 15 years after the US presence in Afghanistan with that massive resources and money and expenditure there? Why is the world not as cooperative with America in Afghanistan today as it was before? How come? I will give the example of Russia. I'm in Russia. How come Russia has now doubts about the US intentions in Afghanistan or the result of its work in Afghanistan? How come China doesn't view it the same way? How come Iran has immense difficulty with the way things are conducted in Afghanistan? Therefore, as an Afghan, in the middle of this great game, I propose to our allies, the United States, the following. We will all succeed if you tell us that you have failed. We will understand. Russia would understand, China would understand, Iran, Pakistan, everybody would understand. India would understand. We have our Indian friends there. We see all that sign of failure there. But if you don't tell us that you have failed, then is this a game? Of course, we are not going to play a game of extremism there. That's why many people ask in Afghanistan and elsewhere whether extremism and terrorism is a tool and a pretext, as the Honorable President mentioned earlier. Are we really fighting extremism, or are we pretending to be fighting extremism? And are we defending our interests at any cost? This is something that I've been facing for many years now in my deliberations and talks with our colleagues around. My proposal today is, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, that in order for us, the international community, with Afghanistan as a place where we have immense suffering. We just today had nearly 50 of our soldiers killed. Yesterday we had 70 killed. And the country in the past 2 days has lost 300 people, young men, who have wives, who have children, who are all very young. The way forward is this. The United States of America in Afghanistan must begin to re-engage in a new compact with the Afghan people. 2, the United States and Afghanistan must begin to re-engage with our neighbors and big powers of the world. That means our neighbors, that means China, that means Russia, that means India, on a clear, transparent platform of objectives. And with this in mind, the international community must support Afghan mechanism for the resolution of the problems that we have. The Afghan mechanism today, the best available is the Grand Council of the Afghan people, or the Loya Jirga. Your support to this mechanism and the coming together of the international community and really giving Afghanistan the opportunity to own its processes for peace and political development are going to free us from the scourge of extremism. Pakistan, our neighbor, has a tremendous role here to play. I wish Pakistan will participate in a very civilized dialogue with the Afghan people. Use of extremism, the exploitation of extremism is no solution. It causes trouble for all. With this, I hope, since the President of Russia is here, and we expect a lot of Russia as a neighbor, as an old friend and as historic ally, to engage more formidably with the United States and the West on Afghanistan, and to lend a supporting hand to the Afghan people to initiate their own mechanisms for the resolution of the problems that we have. And please do send your businesses and investors to Afghanistan. We are too close to you not to have your businesses in our country. And thank you very, very much.
Спасибо, господин президент.
Thank you very
Вы нас
much,
вернули
Mr.
к более
President.
конкретным, так сказать, вопросам.
You've returned us to the more specific issues, and I have a minor question to you, and if you can please answer briefly.
Вот вы сказали, что у вас демократические
You've mentioned
инстинкты, в принципе.
that you have democratic instincts. Maybe that's the problem.
Мы часто на Валдае обсуждаем, что
Here at the Valdai Discussion Club, we discussed that democracy is a great form of ruling, but now it's faced with many complexities and works in reverse. Maybe it's not suitable for Afghanistan, and you must try something else.
No, we are, as the Americans would say, hell of a democratic country. Because we are as I told you yesterday, each Afghan is a king to himself. We are a very egalitarian country. And egalitarianism gives you the foundations of debate and but it must be our own. It cannot be, I must say this, I'm sorry, I don't like to mention this, but I must say this. It cannot be John Kerry's democracy. It has to be ours. He shouldn't come to us to count our votes or to assign the number of votes to this or that candidate. When it is our democracy, when we practice it the way we are, according to our tradition, it works. So, as the Chinese would say, we must choose our own model of development, and that's the right course.
Спасибо большое.
Well, thank you so much. Well, John just can count, so there's no results in it. Well, yeah, we can do it better. John is a good guy, a good fellow, but he cannot count. He's not a very good friend of mathematics, I guess.
He counted my votes.
Well, so we are now talking about democracy, about the essence and gist of democracy. As we know, democracy goes hand in hand with the market economy, and market economy in the 21st century has turned into a comprehensive global economy, and we are happy to have during our session today a man who has a different point of view. It's the founder of Alibaba Group company, Mr. Jack Ma. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Mr. President Putin, ladies and gentlemen, well, it's my great honor to be invited. I'm sitting there and thinking why I should not be invited earlier. When I hear so many worries and fears, that makes me feel I'm a very happy person because I don't have that much worry. I know I have a lot of worry, but I don't have to worry so much like the presidents worry about. I was born in 1960s. In a country, China, that have full of Russia, Soviet Union movies and stories and sounds. So I think China and Russia share a lot of similarities. We both countries came from a lot of problems and came from a lot of suspicions. But every time I come to Russia, I feel more and more confidence in Russia. Especially this time in Moscow, I spent 3 days walking around and seeing around. I see the city is getting cleaner, more order, of course, more traffic. But that's why we think Alibaba should join the force of development of Russia. Yesterday, I went to Moscow University, and I had a wonderful time with the young people, the talents there. I see the anxiety, I see the creativities, and the imagination the young people have from Russia. And I think Alibaba should have the great opportunity to work with Russian young scientists, engineers, to develop something that is good for the future, for the tomorrow. Last year, I flew in the air 867 hours. And I've been to many countries. I feel the world is full of worries and fears. The area I worry about, and the area a lot of people worry about, is technology. I think when we worry about the technology, and worry about technology is going to destroy our future, I think if we have more imagination, if we have more confidence, we will feel much better. 1995, when I started my internet business in China, I was invited to join a group of experts, IT expert discussion in Beijing. About 20 people. We sit in a room discussing how terrible internet will be, what the things we should worry about, any policy we should make. So we had a whole night discussing the worries about internet. Today, 20 years passed. Those things we worried never come up. Those things we never worried all came up. And I'm very thankful for those worries, because that give Alibaba opportunity. We did not have a lot of smart competitors join us. We grow so fast in the past 18 years. Today we create more than 33 million jobs for China. And our sales last year over $550 billion US dollars. That because when other people worry, we try to figure out the way how to solve the worries. Today many things have changed. But people still worry about the internet. They even worry more. And it reminds me the early days, people worry about the cars. When automobile was designed, people worry more about the car accidents rather than the things, the great things that a car will bring to the human lives. And I noticed that people worry about data. People worry about privacy. People worry about security. And I think the most things we should worry about is the worry itself. A lot of countries, because of worry, they lose a lot of things. European today, we don't see a lot of big internet companies. One of the reasons they worry too much, I think. And the worry will stop us from being more creative, being more confident, and stop young people from getting more opportunities. We don't have solutions for future, but there is solution for future. We don't have solutions for tomorrow, but our young people will have solutions for tomorrow. Yesterday, when I see the young people in Moscow University, I know they're trying their best. I think they will have solutions for future. So trust the young people, trust our future. And young people never worry about the future. All the universities I talk to, speak to, young people never worry about future. They worry about us. They worry about the stupid decisions we make for them. Because most of the stupid policy decisions we made are all out of great intention, with kindness. So this is something the young people worry about. I've been working in Alibaba. We got 60,000 great, excellent young people from all over the world. In order to lead them, to lead those smart people, they need a stupid leader like me. Stay foolish, stay optimistic, and always try to find the solutions for tomorrow. This is how I work with smart people. Today, the world has 1.8 billion people using internet. They speak, they check information, they communicate, they go anything. Most of the things they've been doing through the internet. But they're not happy because today young people do not want to be informed. They want to get involved. My grandfather get all the information through a newspaper. My father get information through radio. I got my information from TV. And we all told to do this. But internet, giving young people opportunity to get involved. And they want to be the master of themselves. And very, very soon, we are going to have 4 to 5 billion people on the internet. All the problems we have today, we're getting bigger problems if we do not see this with great optimism. The other thing I want to say is if there's something we should really worry about, is we should worry about the education system. Whether you like it or don't like it, the technology revolution is coming. Nobody can stop it. But the way we teach our kids, the curriculums we teach our kids, the subjects we teach our kids, will stop our kids from getting jobs. Because one thing for sure, computer is going to be much smarter than human beings. If we keep on teaching our kids the way we taught in the past 100 years, our kids will losing jobs, will not be able to find jobs next 30 years. Because computer can remember better, computer can calculate better, computer never have this kind of human anguish. So this is something we should teach our kids to be more creative. We should teach our kids to be more innovative. We should teach our kids to be more constructive. So this is what I want to tell that every government should pay special attention to the next 30 years education system. Data we worry about. We worry about the data technology. But data technology is something that might be the solution to solve the world sustainability, solve the world problem of inclusiveness. We are entering into a new world, but very, very few people really understand how powerful it is, how revolutionary it is. So if you do not think positively, you will not have a positive result. If you think negative, you will surely have a negative result. And today we're worried, we feel pain about internet. But I would tell you, we are not even entering the growing pain of internet technology. Every technology takes about 50 years. The first 20 years is about internet technology company. Next 30 years is about application of this technology. So next 30 years will be the years that technology, those companies can use in the technology going good. Car is not invented in America, but America make use of it. Electricity was not invented in America, but Americans use it. So people talk about the digital time and IT time. I want to say the world is shifting from IT to DT. DT is not the digital time, it's data time. Digital time is the upgraded version of IT. DT is totally different from IT. And I don't have time to explain it. Someday we can have a better time to discuss about that. Data time is new theory. And data technology is the solution to solve a lot of problems we have today. For example, people worry about privacy. People worry about security. We using data to using internet technology, internet financing. We have given loans to over 5 million small business. Every small business get loan from us, less than $5,000. And the procedure is 310. They will apply within 3 minutes. Within 1 second, the money will be your account. 0 people touch. So 310, that will solve a lot of problems for inclusive financing. This is called the data that can bring it. IT technology make ourselves strong. DT technology is to empower the others. IT technology, we compete knowledge. DT technology, we compete smart wisdom. IT technology, we compete with muscle. And DT technology, we compete with brain. And IT make us know the world better. DT will know the human being better. So people always say, what's the difference between smart and wise? Smart people know what they want. Wise people know what they don't want. This is what we believe. DT is the human behavior. By learning the behaviors, we will understand ourselves better. When we understand ourselves better, we will know what we don't want. I believe the world caused a lot of problems, a lot of worries, because we want too much. A lot of things we want, we get, actually, we don't want them. In the IT time, 20% of the countries succeed. 80% of the time 80% of the countries don't have chance. IT is 20-80, but the DT is 80-20. We have to care for those 80% of the countries, developing countries, young people, small business. We should be making sure the technology that is inclusive. So about globalization, I think globalization has nothing wrong. But globalization today is not perfect. It's only a baby. 1,000 years ago, the global trade is determined by few kings and queens. Last 30, 40 years, the globalization is determined, is benefit only 60,000 big companies. What if we can support 60 million small, medium-sized companies? They can grow cross trade. What if we can help young people? They can global buy, global sell, global pay, global deliver, and global travel. So we think in the last century, massive, large scale is the standardization is the key. This century, personal made, small, medium-sized companies, we may have a lot of things that is different. And I always say that the DT time, the world will be different. We can make the world more fair. We will make the technology to empower more young people, more small business. Our business grow because we support using technology, support young people only. We support SME only. And globalization can never be stopped because the world is movable. And the other thing is that we can never and we should never stop trade. when trade stops, war starts. Trade is something to build the trust. When we do trade, we respect the other culture. When we do the trade, that means we appreciate the other culture. So we should encourage more trade. We should encourage more young people, small business can do across the board. So I think the very important thing is the world should not only need a G20, we need a G200. The world should not only have a B20, we should have a B200. And trade, of course, the trade formality, the way we do trade is going to be totally different. We are not going to do trade to go to the trade shows, trade fairs. Most of the business will be done on the internet. And in the future, the trade will not be done through containers. The trade will be done through packages. In the future, business is not a B2C. In the future, the business is C2B. So this is what we believe. And we think in the future, there will be no made in China, no made in America, no made in Russia. It's going to be made in internet. You may design here, transport there, manufacture in this country. So the thing is that we should not worry about the trade will be stopped. We should worry about what kind of policies that we should encouraging the global trade. What kind of policies that we can encouraging young people, small business can be able to do that. So finally, I want to say is that DT technology will kill a lot of jobs. But most of these jobs are stupid jobs. Those jobs are not supposed to be done by computers, are not supposed to be done by human beings. Past 100 years, we make people like a machine. Now we are making machine like a people. And we are doing the other side. But the real way, the right way to do it is in the next, I think, 10, 20 years, we'll make machine like a machine and people like a people. Machine will never be able to conquer human beings. Machine is smart. Machine is stronger. Machine is faster. But machine does not have a soul, does not have a value, does not have a belief that people have. So we should not make machine think like human beings. We should make machine learn like human beings. So this is what I want to finally say. Technology is scary. The first technology revolution caused World War I. Second technology revolution caused directly or indirectly caused World War II. Now we are in the third technology revolution. What is the third world war? If the human beings do not have the same enemy, we're going to fight among ourselves. The enemy should be against poverty. The enemy should be against the environment. The enemy should be against the disease. And I think all those countries, China, Russia, USA, European, we should share the technology, unite together to fight this war. And this is the war that if we fight it together, young people are going to be much happier. And finally, the bad news is that we are entering into a world that we don't know. The good news is everybody don't know. So please pay special attention to next 30 years. Please pay special attention to those people who are below 30 years old, because they might be the leader for tomorrow. They are the challengers, and they are the changers. And please pay attention to those companies who have less than 30 employees. If we pay attention to small, and small is powerful, small is beautiful. And if we pay attention to the young people, small business, I think the world economy could be much more sustainable. Thank you very much.
Вот откуда оптимизм-то пришел.
That's where we have the optimism from. I like business because now I feel more optimistic and everything is possible. It's quite pleasant to see that a man thinks that everything is possible. I don't have even questions. Everything is quite clear. Well, then we have to balance it somehow. So the last to speak would be the representative of the expert community, Mr. Asle Toye. I hope that you will bring us back to the shadow.
I will certainly do my very best. First of all, I must say I'm honored to be here at this panel representing what I gather is the academics alongside the representative, the leader of a great power, the former leader of a small power, and a titan of industry. I would like to take this opportunity initially to thank the organizers of this Valdai Forum, the Discussion Club. You have done a great job, and the 4 days that have passed have been inspiring. It's given us a chance to get to know the Russian perspectives, but also to be discussing our common global challenges in the most forthright manner. Then to the matter at hand. Human history, my friends, is characterized by prolonged periods of stability being interrupted by short, sharp shocks. And those shocks are often associated with war, creating creativity, but let's be honest, mostly destruction. The most dangerous moments in international politics, political science teaches us, occur when a rising power is about to change place with an established power. The established power will then grow less inclined to uphold the rules of the system that it has created, being disappointed that it has allowed other actors to grow powerful within it. The rising powers, on the other hand, are frequently less than happy about the established system, feeling that it has been weighed so as to prolong the dominance of the established powers. And this is frequently true, both sides of it. What happens, according to scholars such as Robert Gilpin, is that as the international community grows less certain about the established power's willingness to police the system, this can encourage risky behavior, uncertainty, insecurity. Recently, there's been a book making the rounds called the Thucydides Trap. Those of you who are not familiar with Thucydides, it's a Greek thinker who wrote about the Peloponnesian Wars, and he explained the wars that broke out between Athens and Sparta in the words that the rise of Athens and the fears that this created in Sparta made war unavoidable. Graham Allison, who wrote the book The Thucydides Trap, he has examined 15 cases of power transition that has taken place since the 15th century. And what he found is that in 12 out of 16 cases, the established, the incumbent power, and the rising power have ended up in war. And therefore, this should really focus our minds, because we are living through a period of power transition right now. Over the years, there's been much discussion about the world becoming multipolar. I don't really believe in that. Frankly, if anything, the world is becoming more bipolar. The United States is still by far the most powerful actor in the international system, although China and its economy is growing so quickly that if it hasn't already surpassed the American economy, it will do so in the short to medium term. It depends on what measures one chooses. China is no match for the United States militarily, but Russia has still got one of the most awesome military arsenals, especially nuclear weapons, of any state in the world. And we have seen, well, in accordance, it's predictable when you look at balance of power theory, rapprochement between China and Russia, these two states seeking closer together. This is going to provide a great challenge to the United States, and how the United States and the West meet this challenge will determine how we will live, and if we will live in the years to come. I think the West has had great difficulties dealing with the rise of challengers, and I would like to remind you that the West was never so powerful as it were in the years immediately after the Cold War. During the Cold War, the West had developed to use a medical expression, a blood circulation system, a nervous system from institutions that allowed a permanent flow of humans, capital, ideas, merchandise, which became the beginning of globalization. And many in the West saw globalization as westernization, and it has come as somewhat of a negative surprise that other actors have taken aspects of Western globalization and made it their own, and have been very successful doing so. Therefore, in the West, the current times are often seen as a time of uncertainty and fears. I think it was very well pointed out in the last presentation, this agonizing over the future. And we often forget that for many others, especially on the Eurasian continent, this is a golden era. On the Eurasian continent, we're seeing a lot of power accumulating. We're seeing roads, cities, train networks, snaking through the post-Soviet wilderness and creating a fabulous amount of wealth and dynamism. And we see, and this is also globally, that we are living through a time of great technological progress, a time of engineering marvels that have been unsurpassed in human history. And at the same time, we see an international system that is, if not in a new Cold War, then certainly at a low ebb since the end of the Cold War. So, where the optimists, especially the champions of business, see connectivity and interdependence as being our futures, the pessimists see chaos, a world that is no longer governable. I think that we will find that chaos and connectivity will coexist, and that we will have both at the same time. I think in the West there is a crisis of liberalism. There is a crisis of a very particular kind of liberalism that has been met with a great amount of public dissent in a great many countries. I don't think liberalism is dead, but I do think that the specific form of liberalism, the one-eyed, over-certain type of liberalism, so eager to impose itself on others, has gone somewhat out of fashion. In Eurasia, I think some of the adherents to authoritarian capitalism frequently forget that the great advantage of democracy, it's not unfiltered public opinion into the realm of policy. The great strength of democracy is independent institutions and dynamic institutions. And I think that the adherents to authoritarian democracy will find a problem as their countries are going through these titanic changes, where people are seeing in their own lifetimes greater changes to absolutely every single facet of their life, how they live, where they live, what they work with, how their families operate, everything, how they adhere to religion, everything. That's going to create a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anguish in these societies. And I think that the state institutions are going to find it difficult to keep pace with the public mood. I think that is going to be the corresponding challenge for countries that we in the West at least call authoritarian, adherence to authoritarian capitalism. We are now seeing a period of greater rivalry. And let's keep in mind, competition is good. Competition is what drives humanity forwards. We shouldn't be afraid of competition. What we should be afraid of is making enemies of each other. The Russian president gave a comprehensive list of Russian grievances. And as far as I can see, many of these grievances are legitimate and should be taken very seriously. And I have to say that in the West have their own list of grievances directed at Russia and other actors. I think it might be a good idea if we put those lists away somehow and try to cooperate better. It's quite interesting to see that the dynamism that we see in the globalization of the economy has not been replicated in the dynamism of the international institutions. Many of the international institutions, as the Russian president rightly pointed out, have been eroded in the last years. And we do need to reverse that trend. And I think that the path forward to peace, and nobody's going to be surprised that I say this coming from the research wing of the Norwegian Nobel Institute. I think we can learn something from the last will and testament of Alfred Nobel, where he singled out 3 charges, 3 suggestions for how to foster peace. He focuses on the importance of disarmament, the importance of institutions, and the importance of goodwill, the will to work for fraternity amongst nations. And I think in order to achieve this, we're going to need statesmanship. There's no way around it. And I think that is my appeal and my suggestion for this panel. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. I know that you have nothing to do with the Nobel Prize Committee, which awards Nobel Prizes, but still you work at the Nobel Institute, so I have to ask you. Just 2 weeks ago, we found out the new Nobel Prize winner, the movement which is against the use of nuclear weapons. Do they believe in this utopia, that somebody is going to give up their nuclear weapons as it guarantees their stability, or it's some kind of a gesture which is supposed to show the right way of thinking?
Well, if it is utopia, then Russia believes in this utopia. The United States believes in this utopia. It has been frequently stated in the UN, in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The established powers have committed to working for a world without nuclear weapons. I can, and I don't speak on behalf of the committee, but in their statement, the committee said the Nobel Peace Prize, there was 2 issues that was lifted forth. One, bringing attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. And I think this is something that cannot be stated too often. The use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable. And I think this is something where public opinion matters. I think that, especially, we've been talking about the young. I think that the young need to weigh in on their policymakers. The second issue is that ICANN has brought forth a new attempt or a new path towards bringing about a world with less, with fewer, or with no nuclear weapons. This is one of the few new initiatives on the horizon at a time where many of the established processes are bogged down and are not moving at all. And I don't think anybody should be surprised that the Norwegian Nobel Committee focuses on nuclear weapons. No single issue has been singled out by the Nobel Committee more often than nuclear disarmament. 10 Nobel Prizes has had this in its rationale, so nobody should be surprised.
Then Mr. Putin, as 10 prizes were given in our country in its own time, even presented this idea of full refusal of nuclear weapons. Maybe we should go back to it. Our colleague from the Nobel Institute is right, partially. And as to the question if nuclear disarmament is possible or not, I would like to say yes, it is possible. And as to whether Russia wants to have universal nuclear disarmament, yes, we do want that, and we will aspire to have that. This is the positive part, but as usual, there are some things that provide food for thought. Modern, technologically sophisticated nuclear powers are developing other kinds of weapons, much more precise, and according to their destructive power, just a little lagging behind the nuclear weapons. Because the nuclear weapons, the nuclear bomb or the missiles, you cover up certain surfaces. You have this major charge which hits a greater territory with the power of its blast. And modern, sophisticated technologies try to come up with and develop precision weapons, and its destructive power, it's almost equal to the nuclear weapons. It's not quite there, but it's quite close. So we need to think seriously about it. I see the situation in the world, and some people say that we are ready. We are so advanced in the development and the use of the new weapon systems. And I would like to say that we are ready to do that. We've been scrutinizing the situation in the world, and our country is going to come up with new arms system as well, non-nuclear ones. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. We've moved to the second part of our discussion. You have a unique opportunity to ask questions. Dmitry Suslov, you go ahead. Thank you very much. The High School of Economy, the Valdai Club. I wanted to develop the nuclear area just to focus in on the dimension where we have destruction but no creation. And that is arms control. And first of all, nuclear arms control. You have rightfully pointed out that the military and strategical situation is undergoing massive changes. Those are precision, not nuclear arms, the anti-missile defense, and cyber defense, which is now considered as the area of war. But instead of developing a new concept of international strategic stability, and instead of adapting progressively the previous rules to the new situation, unfortunately, we are witnessing only the destruction of previous rules without any new rules being created. And as you've mentioned, in 2002, we've opened the Pandora box when the US withdrew from the anti-missile defense treaty, and we have to say that Russia is also taking part in this dismantling process. And you've mentioned the plutonium agreement on the disposal of plutonium, and Russia again suspended its participation in the agreement last year. And the process has gone so far that the INF Treaty is now under threat of 1987, and the American congressmen are not only allowing Trump to withdraw from this treaty and now even adopting such a law on the budget, which makes them manufacture the medium-range missiles, and the START-free treaty is also under question. And by following this path, we are going back to the 50s, which, as we know, ended up in the Caribbean crisis, Caribbean missile crisis. The question is clear, thank you. Are we prepared for this kind of situation, considering that the strategic situation in the world is much more complex and complicated than back in the 50s? And what does Russia have to do, and all of us have to do, to have this evolutionary transition to new kind of stability? Thank you. We are not going back to the 50s. We are being returned. They are trying to return us to the 50s. You mentioned several agreements, and we said we suspended our work within the framework of those agreements. And why would we do that? Because the American side is doing nothing. We cannot unilaterally just implement the entire treaty. We've just recently unilaterally disposed of all of our chemical weapons. I've mentioned that in my introductory remarks, and our American partners said that we are not going to do just yet. We have no money for it. They are printing those money, they're printing the dollars, but they apparently have no money. And we do have money. We've constructed 8 plants, and we've invested a great amount of money. We've trained the personnel, we've done this great job, and now we are trying how to use it. As for the plutonium I've mentioned, we created the new fuel and concept, and it also requires money. We've built a reactor and negotiated with Americans as how to decommission them. And unilaterally, they have not even mentioned it to us. To their partner, they did not even mention that they're going to breach the treaty. And how did we find out? From the budget application to the Congress. They wanted $120 million for the new forms of disposal and decommissioning. And then they postponed it to unspecified time in future. This plutonium, it can be returned to the weapons-grade state. We have not withdrawn from those agreements. We have just suspended our participation, expecting a proper reaction from our partners, and we hope that they will go back to negotiations. And as for the anti-missile defense treaty, I have to agree with you. And I've mentioned that several times, and experts say that this was the bedrock of the whole system of international security in strategic arms. And despite all those discussions taking place for years, we have not been able to hold our American friends accountable according to this treaty. And they do not like the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. We are not going to withdraw from that. Maybe we are not satisfied with everything, but there has to be a compromise. And to have this treaty in place is better than to have no treaty in place. And by understanding that, we will do our due to implement all our commitments, and we will do that. As for the INF, for the short-range and medium-range missiles, we've recently heard the accusations that Russia is breaching this treaty and is developing something. Maybe we would be tempted to if we didn't have the land-based and sea-based, marine-based missiles. The US had such missiles and we didn't. And when we concluded the INF, we talked about the land-based missiles and our missile systems. And when eliminating our missiles of short and medium range, the head engineer committed suicide because he believed it was treason against his country. But this is a tragic story and we should open up a new page. And the US still has those air-based, sea-based missiles. And on the part of the USSR, that was unilateral disarmament. But now we have air-based and sea-based missiles. You know how the calibers are working from the Mediterranean, from the Caspian Sea, and from the air, from the submarines, whichever way we like. And part of calibers, that's with a range of 1,400, we have our land-based missiles with 4,500 meters. Those are very powerful systems indeed. And believe that we have evened out the situation. And if you do not like it, and you want to withdraw from the treaty, for example, our American partners, then on our part, we have a simultaneous and immediate response, and a mirror response.
So we've complied with all of our obligations. We will be doing this as long as our partners are doing the same.
Piotr Duszkiewicz
from University from Canada. Mr. Putin, first of all, thank you so much for talking to us. It's a pleasure to see. At the beginning of October, Canada has joined the Magnitsky Act. Many countries have already said that they are ready to support this law. We feel concerned about this, about the consequences of this process. Could you comment on this, please? Thanks. When the situation with Mr. Magnitsky, who has passed away in prison, happened, I wasn't engaged in international relations. I was the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, but of course I was aware of what's going on, and I discussed this issue with the then President, Mr. Medvedev, and it was unexpected for us, and it was puzzling, because around this tragic event, when a man passes away, he was accused of something, but of course, all the time it's a tragedy. We began to see those political games. Well, what do I think about the issue that you mentioned about the fact that Canada has joined or will join to this act, or any other country would do the same? Those are non-constructive political games around things that, in fact, in their essence, are not the things that should be treated like this. We don't have to talk about this. What's at the basis of all the events that took place? Those are unlawful acts of group of persons headed by Mr. Browder, if I'm not mistaken, and he, during 10 years, lived in the Russian Federation as a tourist, and he was engaged in illegal acts. He bought shares of Russian companies without having a right to do so, because he was not a resident of the Russian Federation. Tens and thousands of millions of dollars was transferred abroad, and he evaded taxes both in the Russian Federation and in the United States. Over the last years, according to open American data, you're able to have a look at them. The Brothers Ziv company, with which Mr. Browder had relations, is sponsoring or Democratic Party or Republican Party, but in a less volume. It's the last transfer they had. Well, it's in the open data. They transferred $1,200,000 for the Democratic Party. They are protecting themselves. In the Russian Federation, Mr. Browder was sentenced to 9 years of imprisonment for those illegal actions, but for some reason, because our Office of Prosecutor General has requested the Ministry of Justice of the United States in order to give the information and to work closely together. They did not give any response. They are just using this in order to instigate some Russian hysteria, and nobody has a desire to look at the essence of this problem. What's in the basis? But there's just the criminal acts. So, Ray Millerson from that side. Yes, please, you have the floor. Thank you so much. I have a question to President Putin. In your address, you mentioned Catalonia. Well, according to my observations, the independence could be reached when some major countries, or at least regional actors, are interested in this independence, or if no one just pays any attention to this. In the address of March 2014 about Crimea, and 1 month ago, I visited Crimea. I really liked this place. You quoted the consultative conclusion of international justice about Kosovo. The declaration of independence of Kosovo, of course, breaches international law, but with the bombardments of Serbia, Kosovo also did the same, and that's why Kosovo has become de facto independent state. And I think that Kosovo has opened this Pandora box. Then the independence of Kurds in Iraq goes for the aspirations of Kurds themselves and maybe of Israel, but it's not sufficient. The whole Europe and the European Union is fearing of the independence of Catalonia. Madrid uses force. Well, it was rather moderate use of force against those who advocate for the independence of Catalonia. So my question to you, except for following the principle and complying with the principle of non-interference into internal affairs of other states, how could Russia, from one side, to help to resolve those conflicts in order to also contribute, not to contribute to this period of sovereignties, and from the other side to help ethnicities to have majority and to realize their own aspirations? What would be the position of Russian Federation in this case? And I also have to mention about the 90s, which you mentioned, those reckless 90s. I recall the the talks with Mr. Kozyrev with Mr. Nixon about the fact that Russia has no national interest, they have only a humanity interest, and Nixon just nodded. Well, it speaks that Nixon has a head, the fact that he nodded, and Mr. Kozyrev didn't have any head. He has not any head and any brain. So as for the parade of sovereignties, as you called it, and our approach towards it, I think globally that the creation of mononational states is not a panacea from possible conflicts. Because after different sovereignties being proclaimed and separations, the creation of these mono-national states may lead to clashes for the realization of aspirations between newly established mono-national states. And this is going to happen, as we think. That's why when the peoples are united in the framework of one country, they have greater possibilities for the balanced policy in the country. Well, you see the example of the Russian Federation. We have around 10% of Muslims living in our country, around 10%. It's a great number, and those are not some foreigners or migrants. They don't have any other homeland. They see the Russian Federation as their homeland. And this led us to initiate the fact that we began to be the observers in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And this, of course, influences our internal and external policy. This makes our policy more moderated, balanced, and of course we consider this part of international community and their interests. The same is true for other countries. As for the decision of the International Court of Justice of the UN, I have this decision, this statement, but I didn't want to take much of your time, and so I didn't want to quote it. But now, knowing that we will be discussing this, all of you are experts here, and you know very well all those things. I would like to remind you that 8th of October of 2008, the General Assembly of the UN adopted Resolution 63/3, whether the unilateral Declaration of Independence by temporary institution of Kosovo does it comply with international norms? And this question was raised to the International Court in The Hague on the 22nd of June in 2010 after 2 years of consideration. The International Court has made this consultative statement when it said that the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo from 17th of September of 2008 didn't break the international law, didn't violate it. All the evaluations and conclusions of the court are not only about the Kosovo's case, but also about the issue of applicability of Declaration of Independence by a part of one state in principle. In this case, you are totally right. This interpretation cannot only be applied only to Kosovo. This is the Pandora box which has been opened. You just hit the bullseye. You are right. Look what's stated in the decision of the International Court of 2010, Article 79. The practice of states doesn't states the appearance of new rule that would prohibit the Declaration of Independence in those cases. There is no general prohibition in the Article 81 for the unilateral Declaration of Independence doesn't emanate from the Security Council practice. Article 84, International Court states that the international rules have no prohibition for the Declaration of Independence. So it states that the Declaration of Independence from 17th of February of 2008 didn't violate the international law. That's what's stated in those documents. And Western countries just try and push this international court in The Hague. We know this for sure, that they recommend, the USA They recommend the International Court in writing. The State Department has written this. The principle of territorial integrity doesn't exclude the appearance of new countries on the territory of the countries that already exist. Then the Declaration of Independence may, and it happens sometimes, may violate internal laws, but it doesn't mean that there is a breach of international law. Then, in commas, in many cases, Kosovo included, the Declaration of Independence may say about the fundamental respect towards international law by the new state. Then Germany, this issue about the right to self-determination, there cannot be applied a norm about the respect of the territorial integrity of states. So, they decided to declare independence. Well done. Then, this norm cannot be applied towards this state, I mean the norm of territorial integrity. Then, the Great Britain secession or Declaration of Independence in itself doesn't go against international law. France, international law doesn't prohibit and doesn't let this separation in principle. So, here you are. That's what we have. And then we had the reaction towards this decision of International Court. Ms. Clinton, for example, someone of you may have worked with her, Kosovo, after the court's decision, she wrote this, Kosovo is an independent state and its territory is sacred, and we call upon all the countries not to think around about the status of Kosovo and to make their constructive contribution for the stability in Balkans, and we advocate for the countries that hadn't yet recognized Kosovo to do so. Germany, consultative statement of the International Court, affirms our evaluation of the legitimacy of Declaration of Independence of Kosovo. It reinforces our opinion that independence and territorial integrity of Republic of Kosovo is an irreversible fact. Then France, independence of Kosovo is irreversible. The statement of International Court, which brought an end to the legal debates in this area, has become a landmark, and then will let all the countries to solve another problem. So any other important issues we have now, and now when those any other important matters appeared, for example, in Catalonia, then nobody likes, they don't like it. So this is what we call double standards, and this example just confirms this opening of Pandora box. They let the gin go out of the bottle. So what is our position in this regard? I've already mentioned this. I mentioned that, if you would have listened to me carefully, we hope that the problem would be solved in accordance with the Spanish legislation and the Constitution of Kingdom of Spain. Well, it speaks for itself. It speaks for itself. But, of course, in those matters we always have to be cautious, and we have to be sensitive towards what's going on. We hope that everything will be solved in the framework of democratic institutions and procedures, and there will be no political prisoners and etc. But this is an internal affair of a country. That's enough, I think. Thank you so much. For those who have forgotten, I would like to remind you that Mr. Putin is a lawyer. So now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Simonyan. Mic to the speaker, please. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Mr. Putin, for your great story about American flags on our nuclear facilities. Mr. Hamid Karzai, thank you so much for your brave and sincere position. Mr. Jack Ma, thank you so much for Chinese chandeliers that I bought on Alibaba. And I would like to also say that maybe you've heard that Russia Today and Sputnik, our mass media that working abroad over the last months, are under pressure and they're persecuted in the country where they work in. 2 days ago, Hillary Clinton said that Russian so-called meddling in the American elections, you know, the CIA report, half of it was devoted to Russian mass media. They mentioned my name 27 times in this report. So What we've done was compared by her with the terrorist acts of 11th of September. They want us to be registered as foreign agents. FBI, as we know from the mass media, has opened an investigation. And our journalists are under real pressure every day. They read that tomorrow they will not be able to work. And the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Great Britain yesterday has called, and he has talked about the members of parliament who are going to our broadcast, and we do not know what happened in the future. And 1 year ago, members of State Department told me that they have true respect towards the freedom of speech, and if in Russia there will be no limitations towards American mass media, they, Americans, will not have any restrictions towards us. But now we see that they do use restrictive methods and measures. And I would like to praise some of the mass media. They are working very well. They have major budgets and some parameters, for example, of level of quoting. Svoboda Radio is now at the first place among all the Russian radios. You once joked that after the death of Mohandas Gandhi, you have no one to talk to. But now it seems to be a true thing. Now we are in the situation where we are a more democratic country than those who try to teach us democracy. But in Russia, we have several positions. One of them is that the measures should be measured, and the second issue, the second position, that we have to give our second cheek, and to I would like to know your position on that issue. Well, first of all, as for the situation in general around our mass media, around Russia Today and Sputnik, our capabilities cannot be compared. I mean, capabilities of our country and capabilities of our colleagues in the USA and Europe. We don't have world news outlets with the world coverage. This is the monopoly of Anglo-Saxon world, of the USA, first of all. Yes, we've been told all the time that it is not democratically to push on, to influence upon any mass media that are working with respect to the law, and that we should not exert pressure on journalists. There's only one democratic way to fight against something you don't like, both authorities or opposition, to express your own opinion, but to do it with brightness and to do it so well so that people could trust your point of view and your opinion, and they could follow your position, and so that they could have your position. All the other methods are not democratic. But what do we see now? Everything that happens around our mass media, and I would like to repeat that our capabilities cannot be compared with the United States or Great Britain mass media. We cannot even compare them. I don't know how to even call it. If I say that we are puzzled, I will be truly soft.
It all changed, and as for the meddling or non-meddling, everyone is aware as to how the British or the American media are behaving themselves. They are directly trying to influence the inner political processes in almost all of the countries around the world. And how can you else imagine the activities of the media, especially those working in the political segment? Of course, they're influencing the situation. They're expressing a certain point of view, in this case, the Russian point of view. And by the way, not always the Russian point of view. I'm not closely following the news outlets, but I can sometimes see what RT is broadcasting. The representatives of various countries, I employed them, the Americans and the Germans, are working there, and they are doing a marvelous work. They are very talented people, and sometimes I'm even surprised by their bravery and courage and the talent to so beautifully express their opinions and to do it so masterfully. And this is the guarantee of success for Sputnik and the RT. And this is what they don't like. But it has nothing to do with democracy whatsoever. And as for turning the other cheek, I've talked about the nuclear facilities. We've disclosed all the information, and we expected our partners from America to do the same, at least to take our interests into consideration, to become full-fledged partners, but this was not the case, as you can see. It was quite the reverse. As soon as they saw that the nuclear sector needs reconstruction and the missiles are becoming obsolete, etc., etc., they decided to do quite the reverse. They are not trying to negotiate with the weaker partners, and its interests are not being taken into account. So in this case, we would take mirrored actions, and we'll do it fast. When we'll see some steps restricting the actions of our media, we will provide a relevant response. Mr. Karzai, you wanted to add something? Do you have any issues with foreign agents as well?
Just a little note. On the media and the role of the international media, where the West is very, very strong, I have a good deal of experience on that from my days in office and subsequently. The alternative media developed by Russia and China is closing the gap, which is a very, very good news. I must also tell you that I know that the RT reaches lots of homes in America, and so does the CGTN. So the gap is closing, and this alternative availability of media is good for all of us, good for the Western audience, good for our audience. So I guess we're going to better days in terms of the free flow of information.
Yerlan Karin, here, yes, at the side. Thank you. Yerlan Karin, Kazakhstan Council on International Affairs. Mr. Putin, our meeting last year went against the backdrop of the Syrian situation and the situation around Aleppo. And this year, at the start of the year, we've launched the Astana talks to resolve the Syrian crisis. And for the first time in the capital of Kazakhstan, in Astana, the representatives of various conflicting parties came together, as well as the representatives of the guarantors of this process, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. I know there's been some developments, several rounds of negotiations, and you've adopted certain documents. How do you assess this intermediary results of the Astana talks? And one more point, against the backdrop of all this, we can see that the crisis in the Middle East is taking a new shape. That is, you mentioned the Kurdish referendum in northern Iraq, the military operation in Kirkuk, and the changes in the situation in Syria. And how do you see the prospects for the further Syrian resolution? How do you assess the current situation in the Middle East? First of all, regarding the Syrian resolution and the Astana talks, I would like to thank Kazakhstan and President Nazarbayev for providing us, together with other participants of this format, with this platform. Kazakhstan is not only a place for us to convene, but also a very convenient place, because Kazakhstan is neutral, and Kazakhstan has never interfered into the internal affairs of this complex region, but rather is a credible mediator. There were points when President Nazarbayev took this responsibility to keep all the conflicting and belligerent parties together at the round table, and this is very positive, and we are grateful for that. As for the current state of this process, it is gaining positive momentum. There are issues, and I'm going to mention that, but in general, it's being very positive thanks to the positions of Turkey, Iran, and the Syrian government. We've managed to bring those parties closer on the key issue of stopping the bloodshed and the creation of de-escalation zones. This is the most remarkable result of our work in Syria over the course of 2 years, and the Astana process in particular. I have to say that substantial role is being played by other countries which are not directly involved in the Astana talks. but are still tangibly present and are influencing the situation, including the US. We, together with our American partners on this track, we have an established cooperation. It's not always easy, and we have our disputes, but still there are a lot of positive facets to it rather than negative facets. And up to this point, we've managed to agree on a lot of things, for example, the South de-escalation zone, where Israel's vested interest is also present and Jordan's vested interest. Undoubtedly, this process would not be such as it is without the positive influence of such countries as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, as I've mentioned, and many other countries as well. Small countries, but very important countries, including Qatar, by the way. And what prospects are there? I have firm grounds to proceed and to suppose that terrorists are going to be fully ousted from the region, but this is not cause for joy to be able to tell ourselves that we've won, because terrorism as a phenomenon has very deep roots, and the roots are in the injustice of modern world, in the prosecution of many of the national and religious minorities, as well as in the lack of systematic education in many countries of the world. The lack of proper basic education is one of the breeding grounds for terrorism. So if we would eliminate all the terrorist footholds in Syria, it doesn't mean that this scourge has been eliminated. We should be alarmed at all times. And I'm also concerned with a very complex process, negotiations between the opposition and the government. The process is ongoing, but it's very weak and feeble. There's great distrust between the conflicting parties. But I hope that we will be able to overcome this, and by creating the de-escalation zones, we'll be able to move to the next stage. And now we can create the congruence for the peoples of Syria so that ethnic and religious groups would take part in it, and the government and the opposition as well. And if we will be able to do that with the support of the guarantors and even non-regional players, the Saudi Arabia, the US and Egypt, that would be an additional impetus to political resolution and then to the development of new constitution, but it's too early to talk about that. This is the plan I have in mind. And the de-escalation zones wouldn't turn into the separation and division of Syria. There is such a threat, but I do not want to have Syria divided, but rather that after the creation of those de-escalation zones, those people who are going to keep the situation under control would keep in contact with Damascus and with the government. And this already takes place in certain places at the south of Damascus, this land that is controlled by the armed opposition. People go to work to Damascus and then they return home. So the very fact of life makes them communicate, and I hope that this would be the case in other de-escalation zones, and gradually, on this very ordinary, routine level, cooperation would be created, which would turn into political agreements, long-term political agreements. Now we will stay on the Middle East. Al-Kerbi, yes, Madam Al-Kerbi, I can't see her, but she's there.
I'm Sam Al-Kitbi, Professor of Political Science and Head of Emirates Policy Center. Mr. President, it's obvious now that Russia and the Middle East is a real successful country and a master of the game, especially in Syria. But in the wake of King Salman visit which Saudi described as a historical visit. I want to ask you, does this, where is the strategic shift in Russian policy towards Gulf states, or this is just something will not last forever, taking in consideration that these GCC usually used to be traditional allies of US, and this is also another success of Russia by pulling Saudi towards Russia. Is this a real shift, or you don't trust the Gulfists? Thank you.
Мир меняется.
The world is changing, and the countries are changing, and the modes of cooperation between countries are changing as well. There's nothing unusual about it. Even back in the Soviet days, the Saudi Arabia had great relationships with the USSR, but there were some ideological restrictions which are non-existent. We have nothing that would separate us in principle. And what can disunite us with the Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region? There are no grounds to have those division lines. I have friendly and personal relationship with all the leaders of those countries, friend relationships, and the King of Saudi Arabia came to an official visit to Russia because it was the first visit of a King of Saudi Arabia to Russia. And it shows how the Saudi Arabia itself views the construction of relationships with Russia. And the fact that Saudi Arabia has its own interests, the historical ties and cooperation with the US is no concern of ours, and why should it be? It's not like we are banned from cooperating with Saudi Arabia, and we are going to do just that. And the Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region would prefer this or that partner in this or that area. And Russia shows the stability in its foreign policy, the predictability and reliability. And I believe that this attracts our partners. We have joint economic interest of a global nature. We have coordinated our position with OPEC countries and Saudi Arabia on the energy market, and the prices are stable, more than $50. We believe that this is a just price, and we are satisfied with that, and this is the fruit of our joint work. We've had the first opportunities to work in military and technical cooperation. There are multi-billion-dollar contracts with the US. Well, good for them. So you have to go step by step, and maybe we'll have more contracts in place as well. I've already been asked whether the Saudi Arabia would once again close the ranks with the US. We are not afraid of that. What is there to be afraid of? It is the Saudi Arabia that should be afraid that the Americans are going to come there with their democratization. That's what they should be afraid of. We have democracy, no problem. We're going to work on that. Now, dear colleagues, I have a request. There are many people who want to ask questions, and the time flies. So let's move to kind of blitz regime, and you should respect one another. Only short questions, no long comments, and I even have a request to our panelists to be very brief. And Mikhail Remezov out there, yes, over to you. Mikhail Remezov, the Institute of National Strategy. I have a short question, but an all-encompassing question. It's about the upcoming presidential term agenda. Now we are talking about who's going to take part in the elections, but it's more important to talk about as to how you, first of all, President Putin, see the historic mission of the person who is to be elected as president next year. what our national goals for the 2018-2024. I have mentioned that several times, and unfortunately there's nothing new about your question, but I'll repeat again. We need to make Russia flexible and highly competitive, flexible from the point of view of the methods of ruling and the forms of ruling, flexible from the point of view of the development of our economy, and looking ahead in terms of introducing new technologies, assessing those possibilities and application of new technologies. We should strengthen our defense to advance our political system so that it would be like a living thing and would grow together with the world. When we speak of technologies, my neighbor to the left, the founder of a great global company, spoke about big data. And we are not even aware of what constitutes the big data. The new example, in the US, just recently, there was a case when a company started to send to a 14-year-old girl the proposal to buy products for pregnant women, and her parents were outraged. And they wrote a complaint to the company, and the company apologized. But when it turned out that the girl was pregnant, and she was not even aware of that, and her parents were not aware of that, and how did it turn out? It turned out that the machine has analyzed the data, and it came to the conclusions that due to the changes in her interests and preferences and her search requests, it came to the conclusion that it was dealing with a pregnant woman, and then instructed another machine to offer the products for pregnant women. That's a great degree of control coming from the machines over humans. There are positive elements to it, but there are negative elements to it as well. And this is what we should think about in our country. And we should rationally and sensibly use it for the benefit of our people, and this is our super goal. By the way, can a woman become our next president? Everything is possible here. Von Plotz, yes, mister. Over to you.
Mr. President, the Russian media are very generous in interviewing participants here, but I was struck by the pessimism about our relations. And I tried to remind them that during the Cold War we had bigger differences than we have today. And our younger generations in particular, but also the business community, are unhappy with the present situation. So would you give maybe me and also your media a little bit of encouragement and say it may not look as good as it should be, but there are perspectives, and I'm working on it.
Well, you know, well, yeah, you're right. During the Soviet era, we had more differences and disagreements, but you know what we had even more? The respect. We had more respect at that time. I can hardly imagine that during the Soviet era, the Soviet diplomat, so they could tear off the Soviet flags from the Soviet diplomatic institutions, but you did it now, and not. This is not one sign of disrespect. It has also been manifested in some other substantial matters. We already mentioned them. We should not repeat. we used to have more respect towards each other and with more interest. Of course, this respect should be based with the economic and military might. It's clear, and of course, partially it's our fault that now we have this position, this humiliating position, like in the 90s, when we let you go to the nuclear facilities, expecting the mutual reaction. And I think we were rather silly, and it was rather foolish from our part to expect this from those who did it in New Russia. But nevertheless, I would like to be positive. I really think that many things in resolving the issues that you are both we and you are interested in, it depends on how will we work together. And that's why we have to think about our prospects and our good prospects. We've just mentioned Syria. I would like to repeat, I don't have a right to go into details, but we have dialogue. It's now progressing on the working level, the level of special services, defense ministry for foreign affairs. It goes almost every week, and we are now able to attain some specific results. So we can do this. This have to be disseminated through to other areas of our cooperation. So now we have more optimism. Ruslan Yunusov, please, the man of the future. Ruslan Yunusov from the Russian Quantum Center, Valdai Discussion Club. Mr. Putin, Jack Ma, has said about the importance of education. From the other side, in Russia over the last 10 years, introducing the unified state exam, we attained many results, but this is the standardization. Maybe in the changing world, when new technologies are emerging, we have to think about introducing new programs in our curricula oriented towards talents. We have online platforms, we have serious platforms. What's your opinion on this? You mean introducing new programs? Yeah, introducing new programs into school curricula. Well, because you cannot profoundly teach all these subjects. Well, there are modern methods of education. One of them is that, as you truly mentioned, you cannot go in depth of each subject. You have to just give a general overview and then to select the most prospective part for each person, for each child, and he might be interested and he might have abilities towards some of the areas. So this is the criteria we have to have. As for the unified state exam, it is a theme, a topic where we have the debates. Of course, this method of examination is justified itself. It may eliminate many problems. Recently, I've spoken with one of my professors, Mr. Tolstoy. He's a member of Academy of Sciences of the Russian Federation. I truly admire him and I truly respect him. He's one of the outstanding scientists of our country, and he has said, and he was truly right to say this, well, yeah, that's good, we have new forms. I'm just concerned about the fact that our education could lose the soul. And this is the food for thought. We have to think about it, because the education cannot be a conveyor belt. This is not just a conveyor belt of knowledge. Education should always have the creative element. Of course, unified states exam is a limitation for this creativity, but we have to introduce it. And we also have this in-depth specialization. You're right. Thank you so much. Grigory Talaraya, please, you have the floor. Mr. Putin, I would like to make a question about the Korean Peninsula, which you mentioned many years ago. I accompanied you in your meeting with Kim Jong-un, and back then we thought that Koreans would not be so aggressive, but when their country had been threatened with their elimination, I don't think that they will go back, and the sanctions that are introduced do not help, and they're not helpful. What do you think? What Russia can do in order to settle this situation? How can we work with the Americans in order to resolve this issue? Well, you know, the situation is quite dangerous. The talks about preventive and preemptive strike, we hear the hints or direct threats, it's very dangerous. I mentioned it on numerous occasions. We don't know what North Koreans have hidden, and will they be able to hit all the facilities with one strike? I really have doubts. I don't think that it will be possible, but maybe theoretically. But it is very dangerous, even if we assume that they're being tested there, and during those tests they're trying to know what they have hidden. They will not be able to know this. So there's only one way to negotiate, to demonstrate respect towards this country. I mentioned this in my address. And what could be the role of the Russian Federation? We can be mediators. We offered a number of joint trilateral projects. I mean, Russia, North Korea, and South Korea, railroads, different ways of transport. So we have to work, we have to abandon military rhetoric, and we have to realize that the situation is dangerous. We have to overcome our ambitions. We have to stop quarreling. So it's quite simple. I also recalled it, because back then we were able to agree that Korea would stop its nuclear program and weapons program, but then our American partners thought that they have to have more. Several weeks after this, they introduced additional sanctions, saying that North Korea can do even more, maybe, but they did not take these obligations. Then they, of course, they withdrew from all the agreements and resumed their tests. We have to be restrained. We have to demonstrate restraint in all those issues. I think we're able to agree now as well as we did back then. And soon we'll have Olympic Games in South Korea. Will be threatened by something? Well, no, I hope that everything will be all right. Will our sportsmen go there to Olympic Games? Well, as for the Olympic Games, what do we see? And I pay my attention to this. We see that the Olympic Committee, International Olympic Committee, is under great pressure. We have no pretensions towards International Olympic Committee, because the professional men are working there, but they're dependent upon those who give the advertisement. They're dependent on the TV channels, and of course from sponsors, etc. And those sponsors have signals from specific American institutions, and we are not just having an idea about this, we know this for sure. So there are two options: whether Russia will be performing under a neutral flag, or not just giving access for Russian athletes. In both cases will be humiliated, and if they think that in this case, that with such methods they will be able to influence electoral campaign in Russian Federation next spring, the effect will be contrary, because it will be a great harm for the international Olympic movement. Mr. Putin, I'm quite happy to see you once again. I'm from the Shanghai University. With the annual conferences of our club, we were able to know that this theme, this topic of crisis and new world order is getting more important. You've been working on this so much, and you've been working with foreign colleagues, with your foreign colleagues, with the Mr. Xi Jinping, for example. What are your impressions about his last speech during the 12th Congress? Well, he has made his speech 2 days ago, but maybe you discussed this somehow, and after this time of cooperation with him, with Mr. Xi Jinping, can you speak about your impressions about his personality? And of course, what do you think about specific progress and about new circumstances for our future cooperation between Russia and China? Thank you so much. Well, you know that publicly we call each other friends, and this is the reality. This corresponds to the level of our relations that we have between us, on a personal level, I mean. but also we are defending interests of our respective countries. And as diplomats say, they coincide or they have great proximity. Well, we have this situation. I hope that this situation will last in the future. On each issue, we are always able to find a consensus. We are always able to come to an agreement. We are always looking for some compromises, and we are finding them. And as a result, we see that the accords are beneficial for our both countries because we are moving forward. We're not going around some issue, not driving it into some stalemate. We have new possibilities that are appearing, and this is a positive issue and a positive practice. As for the Party Congress, we are following it very closely, and I see that this Congress is very open, unprecedented open, because we didn't see that number of journalists, members of international community present at the Congress, and with no doubt everything that was said by the leader of the country, his address, and the debates that are now undergoing demonstrates that China is looking towards future. We see some difficulties, we see possibilities as well, and China has a great economic perspective, 6.8% of GDP growth over 3/4 of this year. Yeah, maybe it's slightly less than during previous years, but I think that the structural changes that are undergoing on the labor market and in the economy of the country, those factors are causing precisely this growth. But in general, China and India, they are demonstrating good paces of economy, and they are drivers of world economy. If we look at countries, different countries, we have the greatest commercial turnover with China, and we have great plans on different areas in space, in high-tech, in energy, and this is a basis for the development of future interstate relations. Well, I want to ask Mr. Ma and Chinese business, what do they expect from the Party Congress?
Well, the business world pays special attention to this this Party Congress, and I read a lot on the way because I happen to be in the Moscow, and I listen and watch. The business community among my friends, they are all very positive about that, and what we need is a legal, a friendly environment for doing business. China should be more open, and for my business, I think China should import more than exporting, because we've been doing exporting in the past 30 years. How can China import more things from the outside world? That would make China environment better, and that will also help in the world economy better, meanwhile can improve China economy better. So I think the business world think that today, especially past 5 years, the central government focused on anti-corruption, which is so successful. It's helped clean the business environment for doing business in China. So, yeah, very positive.
Andrei Sushintsov.
Andrei Sushintsov, please. Andrei Sushintsov from the MGIMO University, from Valdai Club. Mr. Putin, 1 year ago, having an address here in last October, you were speaking about the prospects of presidential candidate Donald Trump. You said that you'll be ready to work with any American president, and you don't know what kind of president Mr. Trump would be. And now we have the impression that Trump is so unpredictable, and it seems that with Hillary Clinton you could have had more clear interaction. What's your opinion on this? Well, do you know how we say, if you think something, you have to put a cross on yourself? Well, this just seems. You better think twice. We don't know what would be the reality, you know? As for the President of the United States, Donald Trump, I can repeat what I've mentioned 1 year ago. I said that we will be working, and now I say that we are working with the President elect by the people of the United States. He's unpredictable because there is a great, because inside of the country he is not able to implement any of his plans. For example, in the healthcare, there's a great resistance towards his activity. For example, he adopts a decision about migrants, and then the court blocks his decision, and it happens all the time. So we cannot say that he is unpredictable only because of himself. It will be incorrect. It happens because of the American political system. We'll be working with the partners that we have. The United States is a major country, is a major economy and a major military power in the world. Unfortunately, we almost don't have a turnover with them, just around $20 billion, but still the influence of the United States in the world is big, and this is one of the most important partners for us. We'll continue working with them if they want this. If they don't want, then we'll not be working. So, Mr. Toya, what do you think? Would the world flourish with Miss Hillary Clinton as the president of the USA?
I have to concur with the Russian president on that. That's a counterfactual. I really don't have an opinion on that. But Mr. President, I was told that you like the tough questions. We've visited North Korea. We've been to the Middle East. What about Ukraine? From a European point of view, the ball is firmly in the court of Russia. It has turned into a semi-frozen conflict. The sanctions that were meant to be dynamic have become semi-permanent. What does Russia intend to do about this, and where do you see this situation standing in 3 years' time? And if I may add, since we're so lucky to have on the panel a state leader who has more experience than most, President Karzai, could you weigh in on this and tell us a little bit about perhaps what should be done and what should not be done in resolving the conflict in Ukraine?
Он сейчас вам подскажет.
Well, he will give you an advice. Mr. Karzai knows how to handle this.
Они там 30 лет воюют уже.
They are waging war during 30 years there.
Средства есть.
Well, they have good means. As for Ukraine, you mentioned that from the European point of view, Russia has the ball now. But we think that the ball is on the European side now, because precisely thanks to and because of unconstructive, well, I'm trying to be rather soft and smooth, because of this non-constructive position of the European Commission, for example, the situation has reached the coup d'etat. What has been done? The problem was in the agreement on the association with the European Union. It was an economic agreement, and then President Yanukovych said, I don't like this text, I will postpone it. Let's work on text, more. He didn't even refuse to sign. Then there was massive upheavals that were supported by the United States, financially, politically, and it was supported by Europe. They supported unconstitutional seize of power with victims, and then it went to the war on the southeast of Ukraine. Crimea has declared its independence, and then its accession to Russia. Do you think it is? Do you think it's our fault?
The situation today is the result of the non-constitutional coup d'etat in Ukraine, and Europe is to bear blame for that because they supported it. And what could have been easier than to say back then, you have this coup d'etat? No, we are the guarantors, the ministers of foreign affairs of Poland, France and Germany, as guarantors, signed the document, the agreement between President Yanukovych and the opposition. And in 3 days they trampled this, and where are the guarantors now? Ask them, what are they doing now? Why didn't they say, return it to as it was before and return Yanukovych as well, and now organize constitutional and democratic elections. They had 100% chances to do that, but then they had to move through the coup d'etat, this armed coup d'etat. Okay, the situation unfolded as it unfolded. We signed the Minsk agreement, but the current Ukrainian leaders are trying to sabotage every item on the agreement, and everyone who's involved in the negotiations is well aware of that. I assure you. There's not a step being made toward implementing the agreement. And at the same time, they say that we are not going to leave the sanctions until Russia adheres to its commitments. And the current Ukraine is not able to implement them. And now that the situation inside the country from the economical and political point of view has deteriorated to the lowest point, and when the police is using gas against the rally to decide that the government would take some decisive step towards implementing the agreement, I can't imagine that happening. But there's no other way around it, so we're going to keep the Normandy format while our colleagues believe that it is relevant, and we will seek to implement the Minsk agreements as well. And just recently, we have supported the initiative to send the peacekeepers, the United Nations peacekeeper, the contingent of the UN to protect the members of the OSCE. Because we were requested to do that, let's provide arms to the OSCE members at the line of division, the line of conflict. And we've agreed to that. And then the OSCE refused to do that. And you should know about that, don't you? And you are all aware of that, especially those dealing with those questions on a professional scale. And the OSCE said that they do not have such experience, they do not have such weapons, and we've never used it in our operations. And we even believe that the presence of weapons might lead to us becoming a target for any of the belligerent parties. Well, no means no. And Petro Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, expressed this idea to create the appropriate conditions to protect the OSCE mission members with the help of the United Nations armed formations, and we've agreed to that, and we've even initiated this process, so we would not be accused of sabotaging it, but then it was not enough. Then let's have a broader explanation for this. You know what we are afraid of, if there's anything we are afraid of? If we would give an opportunity before we resolve all the political issues, before we resolve the issue of giving spatial status to those lands in accordance with the law adopted by Rada and now prolonged for 1 year, if you would not adopt a law on amnesty, if nothing would be done, the closure of border between Russia and unrecognized republics would lead to the Srebrenica kind of situation. There will be a massacre there. And we will not let this happen. We will never let this happen. So, to make Russia bear the blunt that Russia has the ball in its court, this is not going to work out. Let's work together. Now you should influence the authorities in Kyiv so that they would take any kind of steps towards normalizing the situation. We will work in solidarity and we will hope to rectify the situation. We need a democratic, friendly Ukraine. When various empires were collapsing, or as a result of wars, certain territories were taken from countries, this is one kind of situation. And when the USSR collapsed, Russia voluntarily gave away those territories. And we've agreed that the former independent republics would become independent states. And we've never wanted to take anything from anyone, to divide and to share anything. You forget about it because it was our doing. And we have no desire to do that now. We want to have a friendly neighbor. How could you imagine that you in Ukraine would have this association agreement, open up Ukrainian markets and borders, and Ukraine, being a member of the free trade zone, would be a gateway to our market? This is not how it's done, and you should stop. And nobody wanted to listen. They said, we are not meddling into your affairs with China, and you are not meddling in our affairs with Canada or Ukraine. This was the response we received. This is not a real kind of conversation. Nobody even wanted to hear that we had some special kind of ties, that our certain areas of economy are closely linked and intertwined. We should go back to substantive and constructive dialogue. As diplomats put it, we are ready to do that, and we'll be glad to do that, and the faster the better. We need no conflicts on our borders. Now that we've mentioned Ukraine... Oh, by the way, Mr. Karzai wanted to speak.
Well, sir, on Ukraine and the conflict created there, it was during my last years of government when this crisis emerged in Ukraine. I and my close colleagues in my government in foreign policy and security issues convened, and we met. I told them that Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emergence of the independent states, Ukraine was one of the closest countries to Russia in ethnic relations and economic relations and in cultural relations in terms of the value that Ukraine holds for Russia. So my approach was one of sentiment and sensitivity, both. Keeping the Russian sentiment in mind, keeping the Russian sensitivity in this region in mind. Look at it this way. If Russia went and tried to turn Canada into an ally of Warsaw Pact against America, what would America do? React more aggressively than what Russia did. On Crimea, to the extent that I understand, Crimea was given to Ukraine in 1957. Is that true? 54. So it was part of Russian territory. 54. And my government was the first government to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. And we gave that recognition to it. Not because we were against Ukraine as Afghanistan, no, but we respect Ukraine, we have the immense respect for them as we respect Russia. We looked at facts, historical facts, and the sensitivities and the values that we considered were true and behaved accordingly. To my very good surprise, the new Ukrainian president, when he met with me during the condolence ceremony to the late Khadim Haramain Sharifain, King Abdullah, in Riyadh, he was very kind to me. I had retired at the time. He didn't say that you did that. He was nice and good to me, as if he understood our point of view. So thank him for that.
President Putin, where do you see this conflict standing 3 years from now?
Я очень рассчитываю на то, что мы подвинемся.
I hope that we'll be able to make our peace. But it's not enough to talk to Russia. You should influence Kyiv positions. We've made the decision on the language now. This law banning to teach in the national minorities' languages and schools. And Hungary was outraged, Romania was outraged, and Poland, in part, was against it, and the EU is silent. Why are they not trying to condemn it? Silence ensued, and now they have the Petlura monument constructed. This is the Nazi-oriented person who was exterminating Jews during the war. And apart from the Jewish Congress, everybody is silent. Do you feel sorry for your clients in Kyiv? It's not the Ukrainian people who are doing it. Those are the ruling structures which incite that. But why are you silent? Until you have this understanding that this problem cannot be resolved without influencing the other party in the conflict, nothing will come out of it. But I guess that you will come to this understanding. I see the interest of our partners, first of our European partners, to resolve this conflict. And I see this interest, and Angela Merkel is doing a lot. She's spending her time on it, tries to get to the root of the problem, and the former president of France and the current president, Mr. Macron, are not ignoring this issue as well. They are trying to resolve it. But we do not need to approach it from a technical point of view only, but rather from a political point of view. We need to influence the authorities in Kiev so that they would do something. And the Ukraine itself wants to have better relationships with us. They've imposed sanctions against us, just like the EU. And then, in response, we did the same thing. And the president asked me, why did you do that? Well, you introduced sanctions against us, so it's unimaginable. For you, those sanctions would not cause great damage, but they are very damaging for us. But when you impose those sanctions, could you not see that there would be a response? I have nothing to say about it. But the fact that this situation cannot be tolerated and we should try to overcome it, I guess the need to do that is very pressing. And it is evident not only for me, but also for the overwhelming majority of people in Ukraine. And we love Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I believe they are fraternal people to us, if not a part of the Russian people. The Russian nationalists and the Ukrainian nationalists would not like the idea, but this is my point of view. Sooner or later this will happen, us coming together, not on the state level, but in terms of rectifying our relationships, and the sooner the better, and we will do everything in our power to do that.
Thank you. President Putin, I'm Lasina Zerbo. I want to, first of all, thank you and congratulating you for keeping your promise on the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. I met you 2 years ago in New York. I came up to you when there were doubts about Russia's commitment to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. You reaffirmed it, and I'm happy that you said it again today. But I have a question to you, President Putin. You're showing leadership today and in front of everybody here in non-proliferation and disarmament. We talked about North Korea. We talked about international agreement. Can you share this leadership among the P5 countries in a way where the issue of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, that is crucial to advance non-proliferation and disarmament, can be taken seriously so that this treaty, that is 20 years pending entry into force, can see some advancement? That's my first question. The second...
No, that's just one question you have. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe his second question is more interesting than this one. Next year, the question will be short. We will help for this to come about, and we are going to work on that. Vyacheslav Nikonov. Good evening, Mr. Putin. As you have justly pointed out, the situation is now easier than during the Cold War. And I agree, but not in all aspects. During the Cold War, there were no coups d'etats in Ukraine orchestrated by the West, and there was no military presence of the United States and the NATO in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Baltic region. And in recent months, we have seen this expansion of NATO presence there. And evidently, it's happening in breach of the Russian-NATO Act. Does it pose a strategic threat to the Russian Federation, and what would be the response? We are analyzing the situation and scrutinizing it. We are aware of each step, and we understand every single step. You've given me such a chance to say that we are going to do this and that and respond in this way and that way. But we are not concerned about it. They should keep training and everything is under control. Mr. Saran?
Thank you, Mr. President, for this very engaging evening. You've very sportingly taken lots of questions from lots of us, and I've seen very few world leaders who have done this. So I think that's something that really must be appreciated. Very few would also disagree, sir, that in the last 3 years, Russia has clearly emerged as the most important geopolitical actor in the world, be it your engagements in the Middle East and, of course, the Afghanistan process that you are supporting and initiating, your ability to push back against some of the groupings that the Western countries had established are all on record and establish you as perhaps the most singular, most decisive geopolitical actor. But many would also agree that it is only going to be sustainable if we can also see the Russian economy grow significantly in the coming decade, especially in a time when energy markets are changing, where resource and consumption patterns are different, where technology plays a big role. Russia would need a new game plan to move from its current status as a middle-level economy to a significant economic power. What are your proposals for doing this? Does BRICS fit into the plan? And as an aside, when you met both President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi in China recently, how was the atmosphere in the room? Does BRICS still have a valid future?
Вы знаете, и премьер-министр Моди,
both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, they are modern, they are different. Their character and their different features and their psychotype, but they are modern persons. Well, emotionally they express their positions differently, but they look into the future. Well, India, for example, see this in Prime Minister, in Mr. Modi. As for Xi Jinping, he's a cautious person. We talk and we communicate really closely, and I know that he's thinking about the future of his country, about the future of the whole world. And suffice it to have a look at his address during the General Assembly of the United Nations address. It was a brilliant address, very well structured, very solid. And as for other countries, we hope that other countries and South Africa and Brazil will make their own contribution to the process. We've established new institutions for the economic development and in order to support our national economies. I mean the reserve currencies and new development bank. Those institutions have recently been launched, and I'm sure that we have a good and bright future. This is not a closed group. This is not a military organization. We are working according to our interests that unify us, and we also have similar economy structures. Of course, we think how to make our economies modern and developing, digitalized, digital. Now, I hope we've made this way in our Russian economy when we were influenced by the decrease in oil prices, and we were influenced in a limited way, but still by sanctions. This influence was negative, but now it's the fourth quarter in a row our economy is growing, and I think that this year we'll have a moderate but still significant. After this decree, we'll have an economic growth in 2%. Never in the history of Russia we had this low inflation, 3%. We have never had it. So the first time we achieved this through macroeconomic policy, month by month. And our unemployment rate is less than 5%. It's the minimum level. We see the growth of capital investments and direct investments. We have positive trade balance It may seem strange because we finance our deficit from reserve funds. Over the last 2 years, we see the growth of our currency reserves, because last year we had the level of 300 billions, and now we have 420 billions, and they keep growing. So all those factors are macroeconomic basis, and the development program, which has the support for key areas of economy. This is why we are able to change the structure, not so fast as we might want this, but we are changing the structure of our economy. And if you have a look at the earnings basis of our budget, you will see that the share of non-oil and gas earnings are growing. So I truly hope that all those processes will take place. And now we see the example of Brazil. They will start the same processes. Well, our economic experts see that the next step in this process will be done by Brazil. So altogether, makes me feel positive from the point of view of BRICS development. Well, dear colleagues, well, I don't have democratic instincts such as Mr. Karzai has, despite the fact that Mr. President is ready to sit with us and talk to us here. We now have to make 5 questions in a row. Our panel members will give answers, and this will be the end of our discussions. You happy guys who will be able to do this are Sabina Fischer, Quan Zin, Konstantin Zatulin, Toby Gatti. So please, let's start from this side. Mr. Putin, we all know that over the last years in European Union, there are conflicts because of migrants. They are rather acute internal conflicts. After the beginning of events at the east of Ukraine, Russia has adopted more than 1,200,000 refugees that fled from repressions and the war. And they don't want to go back. And we cannot condemn them because they want to have new homeland in Russia. Will you support additional changes so that we could adopt them in Russia? Yes, I gave a decree. I asked the government to do so. We have to do this, taking into account our possibilities and the social consequences of doing so. We have to see whether our social infrastructure is ready or not, but I think that this is a just thing to do. We have to support those people. If they want to stay in Russia, they have to have this possibility. Now we are working on this. Well, we have a million, even a bit more than a million. As Poland has said, there are 1 million Ukrainians in Poland. And there are a lot of them, there are many of them in other countries. Of course, this is the scourge of Ukraine. This is a de-industrialization. Major plants are being frozen. They are losing Russian market. They are not able to sell their products. Of course, they have metallurgic industry, but still machine engineering, aviation, and the space industry are in a bad condition now. I mean, high-tech areas, but I hope that this will be overcome with the passage of time. And through interaction between Russia and Ukraine, I hope that we have to restore our ties, and it's necessary for Russia as well. Now, Sabina Fischer, please. Thank you so much, Sabina Fischer from Science and Policy Foundation in Berlin. Mr. President, you criticized the Western policy as for the relations with Russia. Many aspects you touched upon, of course, need a discussion, critical discussion. At the same time, we know that the relationship between the state and personal contacts, normally, of course, there might be some errors and mistakes committed by both sides over the last 15 years. How do you think? What are the errors and what are the mistakes of Russian policy towards West, and what should be done, what conclusions should be drawn in order to ensure the future of those relations. Well, the major mistake of Russia is that we had too much confidence towards you, and your mistake is that you have seen this confidence as a lack of power, and you abused it. So now we have to pass it, we have to pass this page, this chapter, and to go to the future and have a mutual respect towards each other. And of course, we have to treat ourselves as equal partners.
Thank you, Chairman. I have actually one question to each of the three speakers, if that's okay. If not, you decide, you tell me.
Ask one speaker.
To one speaker, one question. Okay, then have to be Your Excellency, President Putin. This is my 7th time to attending Valdai. Each time I learned a great deal, especially from your wisdom and vision. I just cannot help to ask you this question. We know that this world is undergoing an unprecedented, fast, and irrevocable transition. And as such, major powers matter, and leadership matters. But unfortunately, or fortunately first is that among all the major powers, Russia, United States, China, India, Japan, or Germany, or Great Britain, almost every major power has a competent and capable leaders like yourself, except the number one power, United States. We happen to have a president, unfortunately, that needs to be managed, although it remains to be seen if he's manageable or not. And you have been very successful and a senior in terms of presidency. As a senior president, if you're asked to give advice to Mr. Donald Trump how to be a good president that make a positive contribution to this transition world, what are you going to say to him? Thank you.
Well, I think that your question is incorrect and maybe even impolite, because Mr. Trump was elected by American people. And this is why we have to pay respect towards him, even if we are not agree with some of his positions or views. Inside the country, he's not being respected. This is sad. This is a negative component of American political system. We can argue, but we have to pay respect, even not towards him personally, but towards the people who voted for him. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I've already mentioned this, and I think that the US president doesn't need any advice at all, because in order to be elected, even without, for example, an administrative experience, one should possess a talent and to go through all these ordeals, and he has done this, and he has won. He has done this honestly. As for the leadership, I would like to ask our moderator to change his decision and to give the opportunity to speak to Mr. Ma, to Mr. Karzai, because they are great leaders in their respective areas. The one thing is to be the head of Russia or the US or China, and the other thing is to be the head of Afghanistan with the civil war, ongoing civil war, balancing between different powers, and to going under bullets. That's the bravery and that's the leadership. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Karzai. And Mr. Ma has created a significant empire, a computer empire. It would be interesting to, I would like him to answer this question. Well, Gerhard Schröder was right when he said that Putin is a Democrat. He's a true Democrat. I cannot resist. Well, yes, he was right. He was quite right to say this.
Please respond to, because
to
leadership.
The gentleman on leadership. Well, it's a philosophical question, and I don't know how to answer that. Leadership. I believe it involves personal qualities and also experience together. I entirely agree with the answer that His Excellency
President Putin gave with regard to President Trump. He's an elected president of the United States. And the American people are a great people, hard-working people. I've worked with them, I know them very well. Yes, we have differences on security issues in Afghanistan with them and what they're up to, but otherwise, it's a highly respectable country and a great people that they have, very down-to-earth people. On leadership, we have a tradition in Afghanistan. We don't praise people in their presence. So if President Putin wasn't here, I would have given him as an example. Now you're here, I don't know what to do. So still, I think you're doing very well.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with President Putin about Donald Trump. I think he's a very unique president, and he's elected by the people, and it needs to be respected. And I'm not a politician, I'm a business guy. I was to be a teacher. I was trained to be a high school teacher, and I taught in the school for 6 years. And I learned from being a teacher how to be a leader. A teacher, his job is always hope that his students are better than him. Normally as a teacher, I want my student to be a banker, be a good politician, a scientist, or athlete. I don't want my students to be bankrupt, in jail, or this. So when you have a good intention to your people, people can feel it. And I think being a leader is not about you, it's not only about you, it's about the people that you should build up a good team to support you. Without a good team, nobody can be a good leader. So I think you should have a good team. The team share the same vision, same belief. And the third is a good leader can be proved only when the tough situation comes. It's easy to be a leader of peaceful time. And today, for this critical period of the world, both political, business, science, that we are taking the huge challenge. So a great leader at that time can only be, show your leadership at the tough time. So this is what, and as a leader, when you become the leader, or you want to be leader, or you're elected leader, your job is to face the challenge. The other people can sleep, you cannot sleep. The other people can stop, you cannot stop. This is, unfortunately, to be a leader is tough, and to be a leader, I think, is very lonely. I understand, it's not easy. For managing a company like me, only 60,000 people, I have enough headaches. Managing a country in such a complicated world, I show my great respect for any politician. Thank you.
Евгений Менченко, где там? Я не вижу, где-то вот.
You have the floor, sir, please. Thank you so much, Evgeny Minchenko from the Committee on Political Technologies, Russian Association on the Public Affairs. Mr. Putin, over the last 2 years, we've seen unprecedented changes in governors of Russia. 27 governors were replaced. I would like to draw the attention to 2 details. Thank you so much for assigning the governors who were born in the 60s or 70s. They're young governors, and despite the fact that we have such governors like Mr. Uz in Krasnoyarsk region or Azarov in Samara region, there are a lot of people who had no links to those specific regions. So this is a hope for young people, young governors who have no experience of living in such regions. What strategies behind these decisions? Well, this is a bit, but for the modern and prospective technocrats, we have a unique opportunity to, through expression of will of the people who are living on those territories, we have this possibility to show to the people, those governors, they now have the possibility to show their abilities, to show what they can do, and then they will reach the electoral campaign, they will go through these ordeal and the hardships of electoral campaign. Each step is important, but still we have to create new governors, call from modern and young people who are thinking about the future of the region and of the whole Russia. It doesn't mean that we are doing this just without thinking about any aspects, or it doesn't mean that I am not happy with the work of previous governors or who are retiring because we have such cases or because of their health. Well, this is just a natural process which is going by, and we'll be doing this in the future very cautiously in order to have this balance between our governors and in our government, between reliable professionals and those professionals who are just beginning their way in this area, their career. I think all we've done over the last time was done properly, and I would like to repeat, I will several times meet with the people who worked as governors for many years. I thank them for their work, for their results, but time flies and life goes on. This is a natural process. I truly hope that this new generation will succeed, because Russia needs them. Tobigati.
Thank you. Thank you, President Putin. We've heard from you on many occasions, and it's a wonderful opportunity, and I think you're the only world leader who's ever done this. And maybe perhaps it's an appropriate thing also that the last word is given to an American. Actually, the only American who's spoken. Let me ask you a few things. You've complained and pushed back on U.S. presidents and on U.S. exception. It's feeling that it's an exceptional nation at many times. And at this session, you criticized every single U.S. president since the fall of the Soviet Union without talking about any of the positives. And as someone who worked in one of the administrations, the Clinton administration, I don't remember it that way. And I remember many things that were done, from WTO membership to increased contacts for students, doctors, experts, health space. And I'm kind of surprised that your assessment is more negative than it was last year or the year before. Now, I think many welcome this, and not only in Russia, but in the United States. I watch American TV, but I also watch Russian TV. But frankly, it doesn't leave much room for people who don't welcome this state of affairs. And it gives an opportunity for people to blame any problem on foreigners, and it's usually here Americans. What we try to do at Valdai, and you know this, is talk about why people think what they think and how do we overcome it. So does it bother you at all that you are reinforcing every negative stereotype about the US and making it harder, my personal opinion, to overcome some of these? And perhaps it would be helpful to talk about some of the positive things. About President Trump, I didn't vote for him, but I didn't work for Hillary Clinton either. In America, we respect those who respect our institutions, not just individuals. And I think that's really important. And I don't know if my colleagues from America would agree, but we think the institution matters more than the person. So let me conclude on a positive note, though. If you had to pick one or two areas where you would try your hardest to break through this negative mood, what would the areas be, and what would you try to say to the American people to make that possible?
Well, first of all, as for the critical things that I've mentioned, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in the United States, of course you know this, there is an unprecedented anti-Russian campaign being waged in the United States from the outgoing administration of Mr. Obama, and now it's not over still. Why are you surprised with my critical attitude towards previous and today's administration? I just don't understand this, because the US has this unprecedented Russian campaign, which has not been provoked by anything. Someone has lost the elections to Mr. Trump, and Russia was blamed for this. And then they unfold this anti-Russian hysteria. Any issue, any failure is linked with Russia. Isn't it true? Yes, yes, this is how it is. On any issue, you can find Russian meddling, and they find this meddling. Well, that's the first thing. Second thing I want to mention, we are here today to discuss and to speak about different things and not to award ourselves with medals and orders, and we are honest in this, right? So I've been honest. I've expressed my positions on negative aspects in our relationship. I haven't created any stereotype. I just mentioned facts. Well, the fact is that chemical weapons wasn't eliminated. It's the fact. It's not a stereotype. Instead of eliminating it, they postponed it to 2023. I spoke about the plutonium. Isn't it stereotype or a fact? That's the fact. Instead of complying with bilateral accords, they unilaterally have changed their obligations, and they are not complying with the obligations in the framework of those agreements. This is what I'm talking about, but this doesn't mean that in our relations of previous years, and yes, when I mentioned that we gave them access to nuclear facilities, was it some anti-American stereotype? No. I was talking about our openness, but I mentioned that this openness was not perceived as it should have been perceived, because it is evident, and I have to once again repeat it. An ex-Federal Security Service director, I say that they supported radicalism and extremism in Northern Caucasus. I know this for sure. Then they bombed Belgrade without the Security Council sanction. Is this an anti-American stereotype? No, this is the fact. Then military forces in Iraq without the sanction of Security Council. Is it a stereotype? No, this is the fact. The United States is creating those stereotypes themselves, but doesn't mean that we didn't have any positive thing in our relations. No, we had many positive aspects. I agree with you. And the WTO support, that's true. We had other positive movements and things, even in interpersonal context. We had good contacts and discussions. I will never forget the support of Mr. Clinton when I taken my first steps as the head of government of Russia. Mr. Yeltsin sent me to New Zealand instead of himself, and this is where I met Mr. Clinton. We had rather positive personal contacts and relations. So we have many things we have many positive things. I just speak about obstacles that we have. We are here not to praise ourselves, because the situation is not the best that we can imagine. You have hysteria, anti-Russian hysteria. You are tearing off our flags. You are closing our diplomatic institution, diplomatic mission. This is the result of problem that were accumulated. We are here in order not to praise ourselves, not to praise each other, but to find the problem and to speak about the source of those problems and to think about how to overcome those problems. Are we able to do this? Yes, I think that we are able. We have to work together for this. We need your recommendations and advice. That's why we're gathering here at Valdai International Forum. Thank you for your question. Mr. Putin, as you've noticed, this year at Valdai Discussion Forum, we're not asking you the question that was made during previous years. Do you understand what I mean about the elections? Will you run for this? We have to finish now. We have to finish now. Yes, that's why we're not asking you this. But I just want to say as follows. Valdai Discussion Club just cannot imagine our sessions if you will not run for presidency. Well, because you are our talisman, Well, but you will invite me in any case, or you will just withdraw me. You will eliminate me from the agenda as a soldier who has left the army. And the second issue, here we cannot do anything about it. This is the world community, the Western community, because you has an important function. You are a pole, an evil pole, who can consolidate and mobilize a Western community. I cannot imagine how will they cope without you. So I think that you have to think seriously before taking this decision, because the world needs you. Well, I've looked at Piotr Avin, and I would like to tell you a story about our oligarchs. One of the oligarchs were bankrupt. No, not Mr. Avin. He's okay. We'll talk to him later about the Alpha Group development. Well, it happens. So he's talking to a woman. This is an old joke. He's talking to him with the greater bird than you have. So he's talking to his wife, and she says, well, we have to sell our Mercedes, and we have to buy a Lada, Russian car. We'll have to move from Rublyovka Street to our apartment in Moscow. Well, that's okay. Will you love me? Anyway, and she says, I will love you so much, and I will miss you so much. So I don't think that they will miss me in that way. We will miss you certainly till the next session of Valdai Club. Thank you so much. Thanks all the participants and all our experts and colleagues. I think we have beaten the record today. We've covered many issues. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.